Morning, Speaker Johnson, my colleague, and everyone here, representative from the MTA. Welcome to today's hearing of the City Council Transportation Committee. I'm Ydanis Rodriguez, the chair of the committee. First, let me recognize Speaker Johnson, who immediately will deliver his opening statement.
Good morning. Thank you all for being here today. I want to thank you, Chair Rodriguez, and the Transportation Committee for holding this hearing. I see we've been joined by Councilmembers Cohen and Koo. We are here today to talk about the MTA's new capital plan and also the transformation plan, but that really undersells the importance of this hearing. This is about so much more. It's about the future of New York City, our economic vitality, our place as the greatest city in the world, and the subway system that makes all of that possible. And if it fails, so does New York. The bright side here is that the capital plan, I believe, is prioritizing the right things. Signal modernization is what will actually get us to fast, reliable service. It's an acknowledgement that Andy Byford's Fast Forward plan is the way to turn things around, and the MTA is finally investing more in making the system accessible to all New Yorkers. But this process isn't giving me much confidence that the MTA can pull this off. The capital budget process has never been transparent, but this plan is even more rushed and less detailed than usual. Something this important, something this expensive should not be handled this way. Riders deserve better. I believe the key to real change at the MTA is accountability through transparency, and I will keep saying that. There are still basic questions left to answer. Why are the costs still so high? Can we really expect to get billions from the federal government? How can we finish the most ambitious capital plan ever when we're still working on the last 3 capital plans? We are at a crossroads here. The decisions made in the next few months will have an impact for decades. But what is the city's role in all of this? After losing Veronica Vanderpool, the city may be down to 2 votes on a 17-member board. We have 90% of the ridership and already pay for the majority of the operating budget. We already contribute billions to the MTA's capital program. We will be outnumbered 3-1 on the Capital Program Review Board. We get 1 member on the 6-member Traffic Mobility Review Board, which will have tremendous power over congestion pricing, which, by the way, uses New York City streets to pay for almost 30% of the MTA's capital plan. And we're being asked once again to open up our wallet to give more than ever before. After absolutely no input, we're told to just hand over $3 billion. And for what in return? Hope and faith that things turned around? That the secret to better service is to take away capital projects from New York City Transit? Obviously, my preference is to take the whole system back. Have the city run the subways and buses again. Municipal control, as I've said, would solve so many of the issues I think we're talking about today. That isn't happening overnight, but there has to be a middle ground. Something between that and begging for a real seat at the table. Because the crisis at the MTA isn't just about executing the capital plan. It's about a transformation plan that somehow takes one of the most opaque government structures possible and makes it worse. We're staring down a massive operating deficit, as we'll discuss today. By 2023, debt service payments will be $3.5 billion a year from the MTA. That is 20% of the MTA's revenue. That is not sustainable. If it keeps going, the only people that will suffer will be the riders, not the politicians or bureaucrats that got us in this mess. If the MTA wants this plan to succeed, if they want it to be viewed as legitimate, they should be actively seeking more city input. What we're doing now isn't working. I hope this is the beginning of a more cooperative, productive era, but I need to see a real commitment from the MTA, a real show of good faith. If the MTA wants city dollars, we're going to need a lot more transparency in return. And before I hand it back to Chair Rodriguez, I want to say I have a relationship with at least 3 of the people that are sitting there, and I really respect Andy and Janno and Pat, and I think you all actually have been doing a great job in turning things around. But I think that this capital plan and the lack of transparency really goes against, I think, some of the good progress and work that you all have made. And I've really appreciated the partnership that we've had, the ability to have an open line of communication, to talk about projects and issues that are both district-specific to me, but also bigger system-wide issues that the MTA is facing. I was a supporter of the city chipping in the needed money for the MTA plan that the governor needed the additional money for, that Joe Lhota put into place a couple of years ago, and having the city contribute that money, the emergency plan. And I think that we need more transparency here. So we're going to get into that in the testimony today, the questions that I'll have, both about the transformation plan, about the current capital plan, what the city can expect, what riders can expect, how we can get some of those answers from you all today, but also on an ongoing basis. Today, I really mean this, is not meant about me sitting up here and trying to score cheap shots on the MTA. It's really me wanting to dive in deep on some of the transparency issues and transformation plan issues that I think are really going to say a lot about what happens for the current capital plan, but the previous capital plans that we haven't finished out yet, and wanting to understand in finer detail how the transformation plan is going to affect all of this moving forward. And then I want to talk a little bit about the operating deficit the MTA is facing, and looking at how you plan on balancing that, what that means to riders across the system, subway riders and bus riders. So that's what I want to get into today. I appreciate you all being here, and I turn it back over to Chair Rodriguez.
Thank you, Speaker. And, everyone knows how you have made transportation one of the top priority. And the transportation plan is not only, master plan is not only that bring DOT to the table to have a vision and a policy for the next few years. This is about how are we running buses, trains, making the street accessible to everyone. So we know, and I feel that the new leadership of the MTA also, they know where we are. You know that you're sitting in the hot chair. You know that you're ready to hear from the frustration of so many New Yorkers who inherit a crisis of the largest transportation system in the whole nation and one of the largest one in the whole world. So we appreciate that, those of you that have been around the MTA for years and years, now are also taking the baton on listening and putting your ideas, suggestions to fix our transportation system today. As I said before, I've been chairing this committee for the last couple of years. This is one of the great opportunities that we have to address something that is an equalizer for the whole city. Transportation is important for upper, middle, working class. Throughout the 5 boroughs, we are seeing the need to repairs in elevators, escalators, infrastructures, and the aging signaling system. We have also seen the need of affordability with the fares. We need to ensure that our subway system not only continue running consistently and reliability, but also that it is affordable to all people in New York City. And that's why we established, with the leadership, with the speaker, advocate, our committee, we created a fair fare to help those New Yorkers who live on poverty lines. A large percentage of the people that use New York City's transportation system are working class, many of them immigrants, many of them living in underserved communities, in what we call transportation deserts. These communities are located in transit desert places like in the South Bronx, Brooklyn, Queens, Staten Island, lack of the proper subway accessibility and subway maintenance. This is one of the largest plans in the history of the MTA. And that's why this plan has to come with a responsibility. We must prioritize stations like those at 149th Street and 3rd Avenue, as well as 170 Giron Avenue, subway station, and many stations in Brooklyn which are in need of repairs that have been left to the last for decades. We must also ensure that as the MTA conducts its repairs, we do not see any reduction in services of employee layoff. And I stand with the TW call to be sure that priority should be given to riders and workers. In 2010, we saw the layoff of 1,000 workers occur within the MTA. We cannot have a single layoff of cut services in our city. At this hearing, we are overseeing the MTA's transformation in the 2020-2024 capital plan, will be in effect in, I believe, like in 40 days. The transformation plan was proposed as a cost-cutting measure to consolidate overlapping aspects of the various subsidiaries within the MTA. Contribution on New York City, large contribution even though we don't have the fair share seat at the board, congestion price, and even a Twitter by that guy in DC who said that he will put the money to expand the subway to the Second Avenue to 125th is included in the calculation of this budget. Something that we need to assure that these numbers are real. And I will even call that we should use our private-public partnership in DC to push DC to even expand that contribution to expand the Second Avenue subway to the South Bronx. One of the proposals the MTA is considering is consolidating the capital planning functions of each of the MTA subsidiaries, including moving New York City Transit Authority's capital planning to MTA capital, which is discouraging given the work that the new person that we've been lacking to attract with international experience, someone that is not shy on listening to the frustration, someone that has developed a level of trust by many of us in the public and private sector. He will see his role being reduced, and we cannot allow that to happen. President Andy Byford has put into improving services and developing the modernization plan known as a fast forward, the best one that we have ever had in our city, and we support it. All the more concerning is the fact that the reorganization goes with the release of the MTA's largest capital plan ever, which is estimated to cost $54.8 billion. 73% or $39.9 billion of that amount is allocated for New York City Transit Authority projects, including those proposed in Fast Forward, such as $7.1 billion for signals, so that we can leave behind that plan, that the old plan schedule that we have is supposed to have all the signal system being upgraded by 2044, which I will be like 80 years old if we will follow that old plan. Now we have a real plan, and it's something that the money is there to accomplish. $5.2 billion for new elevator and ramp to make stations accessible, and $2.3 billion to replace 2220 buses, which accounts for 39% of the entire fleet. We cannot see any reduction of the buses from Riverdale to any places in Brooklyn or through the 5 boroughs. I applaud this plan and the steps the MTA is taking to modernize the subway and the buses, as well as create a more accessible system. But I'm concerned that the MTA restructuring could impact the capital process. We would like more details on the restructuring process, such as how it could impact project timelines. Similarly, I have concern about how subway services will be impacted by the extensive resignaling that is anticipated in this capital plan. We must ensure that we do not see cut to services. All the while, the MTA is considering cutting as many as 2,700 positions. We need answers on how the MTA will balance these interests and how they come out to that conclusion. The capital plan is a step in the right direction, but it will take work to fund and implement it. We need to make sure that we prioritize underserved immigrant and working class community. When we bring the new technology to pay through the apps, through the fund, none of them pilot projects included the working class and the immigrants community. And it say a lot about the culture that we have in New York City, where the immigrants and the working class neighborhood are always the last. And we need to continue working with the MTA and advocates to make transportation free for all working class New Yorkers as well as those living in poverty. I'd now like to welcome the representative of the MTA for being with us today. Thank you for being here, and now ask the committee council to administer the affirmation and invite you to deliver your opening statement.
Please raise your right hand. Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in your testimony before this committee, and to respond honestly to council member questions?
You may raise your hand too. Can you repeat it?
Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in your testimony before this committee, and to respond honestly to council member questions?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you for inviting.
So, folks, hold on one second, guys. From TWU, guys, folks. So. Pat, before you begin, I actually was going to, but I forgot. I want to just actually thank the men and women from TWU, which I know you are in your remarks, for the work that they do every single day. They really keep the subways and buses moving, and we really appreciate their hard work. I know you're in the middle of a contract negotiation, and maybe you'll talk about that today, but I want to turn it back over to you.
Speaker, I second that motion, and I also abhor the recent increase on attacks on transit workers, both physical assaults and sexual assaults. I'll note that state law provides that attacking a transit worker is a Class D felony with serious penalties, and I'd urge prosecutors and law enforcement to look to that option more frequently going forward. Good morning, and thank you for inviting us here today. Particular thanks to Speaker Johnson and Chair Rodriguez. I'm Pat Foye, Chairman and CEO of the MTA. I'm joined by my colleagues, New York City Transit President Andy Byford, MTA Chief Financial Officer Bob Foran, and Janno Lieber, who leads construction and development. Speaker and Chairman, I want to thank you for your focus on subways, buses, and paratransit. I thank you both particularly for your leadership on Subway Action Plan funding and Fair Fares, an important program with much to be done. We at the MTA would welcome an even more engaged mayor on transit issues and an even more engaged city council, and obviously you both have increased substantially the focus and engagement of the city council on transit issues. The 2020 to 24 capital plan our board approved in September is exactly what elected officials, city council members, I believe, advocates, and most importantly, customers have long demanded. We're in the midst of an exciting and challenging time at the MTA. We remain laser focused on delivering safe and reliable service for the 7.6 million customers who use the subways and buses every day. As we embark on a historic capital plan and transformation, our core mission remains the same: to keep this city and region growing. All our agency presidents, Andy Byford, Craig Cipriano, Phil Eng, Kathy Rinaldi, and Danny DiCrescenzo, are working hard to improve the experience for our customers day to day. But we also have our eyes on the future. New Yorkers deserve a modern 21st century transportation network, and that's what we plan to deliver with our ambitious and historic proposed 2020 to 24 capital plan. It calls for unprecedented levels of investment across the system, amounting to $51.5 billion over the next 5 years, with an additional $3.3 billion for MTA bridges and tunnels. This proposed capital program is the key to growing and maintaining the capacity of our system, which is the driving force of the state economy. The plan is forecasted to generate 350,000 jobs statewide, 75% of which would be in the city of New York. And we expect that fully 89% of the capital plan investment will be spent within the state of New York. It's important to note service is improving across the system. I want to highlight how we got to where we are today. After a state of emergency for the transit system was declared in the summer of 2017, the state and the city, with Speaker and Chair, your leadership, equally contributed over $800 million for the Subway Action Plan. This infusion of funds allowed us to dramatically expedite essential maintenance work, helping to right the wrongs of decades of underinvestment and neglect. It was a critical step to getting our core infrastructure back on track so we could begin providing improved levels of service. This incredible effort has led to steady, sustained gains in on-time performance across the system. In October, weekday on-time performance reached 81.5%. That's an improvement of nearly 16% from the year before. October was also the 5th straight month with subway on-time performance above 80%. For these improvements, I want to thank Andy Byford, Sally Lieber, and the entire Subways team, including our colleagues at the Transit Workers, especially our partners in labor. These hardworking men and women are on the front lines every day delivering operational excellence. The improvement in performance hasn't been lost on our customers. We're seeing increases in ridership across all agencies. In September, the average weekday ridership on the subway climbed to 5.77 million people. Compare that to 2018, where that number was around 5.3 million. To put that in perspective, the subway system is carrying nearly 250,000 more trips each weekday than it was a year earlier. And buses are carrying nearly 34,000 more trips per weekday. The increase shows we're steadily rebuilding the public's trust. We're also focused on improving the bus and paratransit network. The focus on operations isn't limited to just daily service or to the subways. We're also thinking big and ambitious on buses and paratransit. We know that buses are a lifeline for our customers outside Manhattan, serving more than 1.8 million customers a day. Craig Cipriani and the New York City Transit MTA bus teams are pushing ahead with borough-by-borough bus network redesigns. We're taking a completely fresh and holistic look at service in each borough, including focusing on outer borough needs and transit desert needs. Many bus routes across the city haven't been changed in decades, putting them behind the times when it comes to new developments in housing or job centers. The redesigns are using qualitative and quantitative data to update these routes to better fit our customers' needs. We're also working closely with our partners at the New York City Department of Transportation, and as always, community input is important. We've recently released a final proposal for the Bronx bus redesign, which includes the creation of 3 new routes. Frequency also will significantly increase on 9 major corridors, which will be served by 10 routes. Thanks to Councilmember Cohn for being a great collaborator during this process. Redesign work on the buses network is also well underway in Queens, and we just kicked off the redesign process in Brooklyn. On Staten Island, express bus riders are already seeing 12% faster travel times after that redesign was completed last fall. The establishment of the 14th Street busway, together with the use of automated bus lane enforcement, has all recognized been a great success. It's a prime example of coordination between the MTA and our partners at New York City Department of Transportation, particularly Commissioner Polly Trottenberg. Thanks also to Speaker Johnson and Chair Rodriguez for your support on the busway. There's been a dramatic increase in bus speeds on the M14. It once took an average of 15 minutes to travel between 8th and 3rd Avenues. It now just takes over 10. That's an improvement of nearly 33%. Customers are noticing too, since the busway was launched in October, ridership is up 17% compared to the same time last year. Before the busway opened, there was concern that traffic on the surrounding streets would become unbearable. But according to a study that was requested by New York City DOT, there's been no significant impact on congestions on surrounding streets. We're also investing in and focused on the Access-a-Ride service. We're expanding the popular eHail pilot program, which offers on-demand service for paratransit users, doubling access to the program from 1,200 to 2,400 Access-a-Ride customers. For the core ADA-required service we provide, we're also making improvements, expanding the types of trips offered, leveraging more taxis and for-hire vehicles, and adding 700 new vehicles to our aging fleet. Thanks to improved GPS tracking, customers can now track their trips on an app and web page. And in an effort to make the system more transparent, we regularly publish performance metrics on a public dashboard. The MTA is hopeful that fair fares will prove to be another fruitful partnership, and we thank you, Speaker Johnson, for your leadership on this issue. We strongly support this critical program, which is run by the city to give low-income New Yorkers access to the transit system. We support, too, a faster rollout of fair fares so this program can benefit more people. We're ready to do our part to make that happen. Let's talk for a couple of minutes about the proposed 2020 to 24 capital plan. We aren't just thinking about operating improvements, and the work certainly doesn't stop there. The historic $51.5 billion proposed capital program. In this plan, we've laid out a bold vision for capital investment that will deliver the world-class transit network our riders deserve. The system has been neglected and underinvested in for too long. Just as we've seen a 50% increase in ridership system-wide in the last 20 years, we've also seen an 8% decline in the annualized rate of capital investment. Our teams deserve immense credit for getting the system to a more reliable place, but now is the time to take decisive action to ensure the future health of our transit system in New York City. The proposed capital plan is fully a 70% increase over the current 2015 to 19 program. We worked with legislators, advocates, the public, and our customers to get their perspectives on what the system needs. New York City subways and buses will receive $40 billion investment. I note that that's more than the entire current capital plan. It encompasses all of Fast Forward's priority projects and more. Our goal for these next 5 years is to build upon the success we're already delivering. For example, on the 7 and L lines, signal modernization investments have led to significant improvements in performance. Modernizing the signal system allowed us to increase the number of trains per hour on the 7 line to 29 during the morning and evening rushes, up from 25 to 27, while on-time performance on the 7 skyrocketed from 75% to over 90. That is why the new capital plan includes $5.3 billion for subway signal modernization on 6 more line segments: the Lexington Avenue line, Fulton, Crosstown, 63rd Street, Astoria, and Queens Boulevard lines. 33 interlockings will be modernized or modified, and we're upgrading all our communications networks. The plan also calls for the purchase of 1,900 new subway cars. Together with signaling updates, this will deliver faster, more reliable, and more frequent service. Accessibility is another cornerstone of this capital program. We plan to invest in 70 more accessible stations. That more than fulfills our commitment to ensure that no rider will be more than 2 stations away from an accessible station. We're targeting these upgrades at stations that serve more than 60% of our ridership. Replacing 60 miles of track will also help us deliver better service. This program proposes to install 20 miles of continuous welded rail, or CWR, across the network. Compared to jointed rail, CWR is more durable, with less than half the rate of rail breaks, and provides a quieter, smoother ride. Additionally, 175 stations would be renewed to address components in need of critical repair, including the replacement of up to 65 escalators and up to 75 elevators that have reached the ends of their useful lives. The capital plan also provides full funding for Phase 2 of the 2nd Avenue subway, allowing us to expand the network into a transit desert. This will add 3 new fully accessible stations and a connection with Metro North, finally delivering on the decades-old promise to give residents of Harlem better access to our system. Beyond the subways, the capital plan also advances our commitment to a cleaner, greener bus fleet, which will help to create a more clean and green New York. We're buying 2,400 new buses, 500 of which will be all electric. Our goal is to transition to a zero-emission fleet throughout the network by 2040. After 2029, all bus purchases will be electric buses. A younger fleet of buses can run farther before breaking down, which means more reliability and better service for our customers. Funding for this program relies on a range of sources. Central Business District tolling is a critical element and expected to provide $15 billion of capital. New revenue streams like the progressive mansion tax and the elimination of the internet tax advantage will add another $10 billion. We're anticipating $10 billion in federal funding, and the MTA is also contributing with another $9.8 billion in MTA funds. But it's critical to note that this will be not enough to completely fund our bold vision. To fully execute the capital program, we require additional investment, including $3 billion from the state and $3 billion from the City of New York. The city's contribution would be used to fund accessibility upgrades on the subways. That money would be timed following the expenditure of the $25 billion expected from Central Business District tolling and other new tax revenues. Without the $6 billion commitment from the city and the state, ADA work would be delayed. We need to schedule the MTA's contribution last in order to responsibly manage our debt service. And it's important to note that capital funds are completely separate from our operating budget. The unfortunate reality is that the MTA has had to reconcile our service improvements and customer improvements with the fact that our cost structure is not where it needs to be. Even as we pursue aggressive cost-cutting measures to find nearly $3 billion in annual recurring savings, we're looking at major out-year deficits. It's unfortunately the case that our operating budget is literally strained to the bone. Let me talk briefly about transformation. The MTA is instituting meaningful change and reform to completely transform the way we do business, as was required by amendments to state law in the last session. As part of the legislation that enables Central Business District tolling, the MTA was required to develop a reorganization plan that will result in a more efficient and effective organization. The MTA transformation plan was developed and approved by our board earlier this year, outlining what the future of the MTA could and should look like. That vision would see the MTA become a single unified capital group with consolidated back office functions across all agencies. This way, the operating agencies can focus on core delivery, service delivery, and safety. We're pleased to announce the selection of Anthony McCord as the MTA's new Chief Transformation Officer to lead this historic effort. Anthony will work closely with senior leaders across the organization to modernize the MTA and deliver on the hard work of transformation itself, implementing the necessary changes to consolidate and streamline the agency and ensure the new MTA is set up sustainably for long-term success. Anthony is a senior executive with over 25 years of experience in industrial service and infrastructure roles around the world, focusing on transformation and change management. He's a proven strategic leader with an impressive track record for team building and effecting meaningful change that will drive direct customer benefits. We're eager to have him join the MTA later this year. I'm also happy to share that we selected a future Chief Operating Officer, Mario Peliquin, last week. Mario is a senior executive with over 30 years of experience in the transit and rail industry, and his distinguished career is rooted with direct field experience in both safety and operations, including as a rail traffic controller and safety investigator in Canada. As COO, Mario will lead our team of exceptional agency presidents so that we can continue to deliver gains in performance and maintain a laser-sharp focus on safety, reliability, and customer experience. A critical element of transformation and a key part of how we will deliver on this historic proposed capital program is through our new construction and development organization led by Janno Lieber. This group will be the single central point for capital project planning, development, and delivery. We're not waiting for the next capital program to start. Some of these reforms are already well underway. A great example is the L-Train project, moving ahead of schedule thanks to innovative recommendations from world-class academic partners and under the leadership of Janno and his team. Ultimately, transformation will help the agency to refocus on our core mission, dramatically improving service and giving customers the safe, modern, and reliable system they deserve. It will position us to most effectively and efficiently deliver on the proposed capital program, to put in much-needed reinvestment in our infrastructure that truly powers this region and keeps it moving. Again, thank you for your support. Thank you for the invitation to be here, and we're happy to take your questions.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you for that testimony. I look forward to diving in. Before we get into the details that I mentioned before, there's a big picture problem that I want to address with you. I really do appreciate the MTA being here today, but honestly, we don't see you enough. I think that's part of the problem. In 2018, the MTA came to 3 hearings. In 2017, 4 hearings. This is the 3rd time this year. We could be here all day and I wouldn't get through every question that I have or that the members of the council have. And I know you won't be able to answer many of the questions that we actually have today. We barely have any details about this capital plan, nothing on addressing the backlog for the other 3 capital plans the MTA hasn't finished, no construction schedules for individual projects, no cost targets, nothing on how the phasing will work on the different capital plans and the projects. And if you're asking us to consider spending $3 billion in city dollars on top of the fare box, the real estate transfer taxes, the sales tax, the internet sales tax, the mortgage recording tax, the payroll tax, the taxi and for-hire vehicle charges, and the commandeering of our roads, we need a commitment to have a real public dialogue. The council negotiates and approves the city's annual budget. We can't make decisions on a $3 billion magnitude based off of a few estimates and a PowerPoint presentation. I would love the MTA to commit to testifying at least 5 times a year before the council with senior staff, people that can actually answer our questions, so that we're not hearing, we will get back to you, we will get back to you, we will get back to you, which is what we hear at all the hearings that we have because the appropriate people are not here to answer our questions in real time. Are you willing to make a commitment to have the MTA come and testify at the city council more regularly with senior staff that will report back to us on the questions that are important when we are negotiating a city budget, determining whether or not we should put billions of dollars into the MTA's capital plan?
So, Speaker, you've got the senior leadership of the MTA here today. The last time I attended a hearing in this chamber, we had the senior leadership of the MTA there. You've got our commitment that unless, for instance, particular levels of expertise are required from other people in the organization, obviously we're making a request for $3 billion from the state and the city. It's appropriate that the council hold hearings, and we're prepared to return and to answer the questions that are raised. We did a hearing in Broadway up the street with the Senate and the Assembly a couple of weeks ago, and we're committed to returning to the council.
Thank you. When can we expect the information that I just mentioned on the capital plan, the information related to the 3 capital plans the MTA hasn't finished, construction schedules for individual projects, cost targets, and how the phasing will work?
Good morning, Speaker.
Hi, Janno.
Janno Lieber. I completely endorse your question, the direction of your question about transparency. A couple days ago, I instigated a meeting with all of the advocates because I saw they were coming together on their own, and I wanted an opportunity to talk to them about just those questions and to be transparent about where we are and how we are planning the next capital program. In the past, Speaker, Chair, what happened was the MTA approved, the capital program included a list of projects with schedules attached to them. Frequently, the capital program, as the current capital program, was actually enacted late. And at that point, design would begin on projects. And by the time the design ended, because we were doing 100% design the traditional way, then the projects couldn't get done in short order. What we would like to do is to come up with a plan which doesn't just give you a list of projects and a spend down that isn't realistic, but one that actually is directly reflecting the bundling strategy that we're going to pursue. And what I mean by that is because of the importance of the projects on the right-of-way and the importance of the ADA projects, we may have to do some shutdowns, some outages. And we must make sure that every time we do an outage in the transit system, because we have been improving performance so much under Andy Byford's leadership, that we get every piece of work done that can be done during that outage. So I am specifically going through, to your question, Speaker, about the existing capital program and what hasn't been finished. We are already looking for opportunities to take ongoing projects, for example, the Culver line, which is being re-signaled, and the AC line, which is getting re-signaled, and adding work, some of which has not begun, to those projects so that it can be bundled and it can all get done in a much more efficient way. Once we complete, Speaker, the bundling analysis, and we are right now doing that to make sure that we will hit the ground running and do at least 20 ADA stations soon after the Capital Program Review Board takes action. We will provide a detailed analysis of exactly which projects are going to be bundled and the sequence with them. But that work is ongoing. I've been open with the advocates about it, and I'm completely willing to commit to transparency in how do we finalize that bundling process, and most important from your standpoint, how do we track it going forward? Because we do want this to be a more transparent MTA in the new MTA era.
So when can we expect some of those details? On the bundling, on individual projects, when can we expect the details on the issues that I mentioned? Individual projects, cost targets, phasing of work. It may not have to be all at once.
Right.
It could be in a piecemeal way.
Yeah, and what I said is we'll provide that on the projects that we're going to put out soon after the capital program is approved. So I would say that's somewhere between 15 and 25 ADA stations, and Andy and I are working on the bundling strategy for signaling right now. So I think we'll be able to give you a preliminary outline of that within 60 days after the approval of the Capital Program Review Board, and a fuller outline of how the entire bundling and scheduling strategy is going to work within 6 months after final approval of the capital program.
And what about previous capital programs where projects are behind schedule?
You know, at the risk of incurring your wrath, and I want to get back to you about that, I think that we're in the middle of going through literally every project to see how they can be bundled into the existing program and the future going work. So I'd say if you give me 60 days, I will be able to tell you exactly when the work under the existing program will be bundled and will be completed.
Thank you. So I want to get into the transformation plan. I think the success of everything the MTA wants to do is at stake if you get the potential reorganization of the MTA wrong, and I don't think it was a great start. The Alex Partners plan was done without any real input from the public or from stakeholders, advocates, the city council, the state legislature, people that really care about how this plan is going to work. And one of the main reasons I've been calling for municipal control of the city's subways and buses is because I think riders deserve to know who to hold accountable when things are not going well, or when things are going well, who should get that praise. That, you know, we don't want to point our finger at 10 different people not knowing who actually takes responsibility on this. I have been following the process, and honestly, I can barely make heads or tails of it, so I want to try to get something straight here today. The plan called for agencies like New York City Transit to lose responsibility for capital work. That work would move over to one office at MTA headquarters. For the subway, that meant one division would run signal installation, and another division would be in charge of adjusting service to allow the work to happen. But then last month, the MTA said that New York City Transit would be leading, quote, resignaling work. What does that mean? Who am I supposed to call when something goes wrong? Pat, who do you call when something goes wrong on something in this arena? Does Andy get the signaling work? And if he does that mean the whole plan is changing? Is there anything else that we should rethink as we are parsing these things out? That's what I want to understand here today as it relates to the transformation plan.
So, Speaker, to answer your first question, to paraphrase a 20th century president, the MetroCard stops with me. And you've got the leadership, senior leadership of the MTA before you. This is the group that is responsible. Andy for subways and buses, Janno for capital construction, Bob Foran to my left to the finances of the MTA. If there are questions or criticisms or observations, or in a rare case compliments, this is the group. The signaling is going to be led by New York City Transit. The construction will be done by Janno's group in cooperation with Andy Byford and his team, and Pete Tomlin, the internationally recognized signaling expert that Andy recruited away from Toronto. And that partnership, I believe, will get those 6 lines done. And New York City Transit, working closely with construction and development, will figure out a way to spend funds as efficiently as possible. But also, as Janno mentioned when he talked about bundling, to amortize, I'll use the term, customer inconvenience over as much work in as short a time as possible. So it's not only a question of being efficient with capital, that's obviously a primary responsibility, but also to minimize customer inconvenience and to get as much work done for every outage.
So the person that was supposed to lead this reorganization, the new, that is supposed to lead this reorganization, the new Chief Transformation Officer, Anthony McCord, who you mentioned, Pat, has quite a lot of experience in eliminating jobs. Some have been calling him publicly a hatchet man. I don't know if that's fair, unfair. You'll talk about that. I understand that the MTA may need to eliminate redundancies, but is this how we want to get started? The top priority should be about rebuilding trust, and it's hard to do that if people are afraid of potential layoffs by bringing this person in. Does he have any experience in reorganizing transit agencies?
He has experience in infrastructure, transportation. He is a superb, seasoned corporate executive. I mentioned in my remarks, Speaker, that while we are talking about a $51.5 billion capital plan, there is extreme stress on our operating budget. AlixPartners did recommend this past summer a number of reforms, which we're in the process of implementing. One of those was the reduction of up to 2,700 positions. Many of those will be accomplished by vacancies and attrition. We have the transformation is expected and must result in cost savings over the next 4 to 5 years of $1.6 billion. And reduction in headcount will regrettably be a part of that going forward.
So the new Chief Transformation Officer will report to the MTA board, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
While the new Chief Engineering and Accessibility Officers will report to the MTA Chairman and CEO, you. Why does the Chief Transformation Officer report to the MTA board rather than you?
Well, I'm the chairman of the board. That provision was set in state law.
But why? Do you understand? What was the reason? It seems.
I think it was a sign of the state legislature's belief in the importance of the Chief Transformation Officer reporting to the board. I think that's I'm the chairman of the board and the CEO, and I thought it was an appropriate reporting relationship.
Will multiple lines of reporting, do you think, create any level of disorganization?
No, I don't see that, and I think if there are issues that arise, they'll be dealt with in the ordinary course of business.
Other large transit agencies, such as Transport for London, I just got back from London and I met with them, have recently undergone successful reorganizations that could have served as a template for the MTA. But AlixPartners' plan did not refer to the management practices of other similar agencies around the United States or around the world. In formulating the transformation plan, were lessons drawn from the restructurings undergone by peer agencies?
I can tell you, Speaker, that AlixPartners looked at other similar entities in the United States and abroad in doing the plan.
I actually think there are some great things in the transformation plan that was put forward, and I'm thrilled that fast forward is happening in the capital plan. But do you think that it's possible that we can really do all of this at once? If it starts to go wrong, it could undermine confidence in finishing projects that are actually essential for the growth of the MTA. Are you worried about this? How is the MTA going to finish 4 capital plans by 2024 and reorganize a sprawling bureaucracy and deal with the confusion and growing pains that are inevitable when any large bureaucracy starts to make changes? Do you have any of those concerns?
So let me start, and then I'll turn it over to Janno. I'll note a couple of things. One is new team at the MTA, including new team on construction and development, led by Janno, who was obviously a pivotal player in the redevelopment of the World Trade Center. Probably one of the most challenging, and I have some insight into this given the fact that I spent some time at the Port Authority, but probably one of the most challenging and important public-private projects in the history of the nation, with lots of financial, real estate, physical, political, and community issues. So point one. Point two, the state legislature, among the reforms that were adopted this year was the passage and the requirement that MTA projects above $25 million be done on design build. I believe that will lead to a significant improvement in efficiency. And do you want to talk about it?
Sure. And Pat, in characteristic understatement, omitted to mention that his role at the World Trade Center was to negotiate against me. So that's how we got to know each other. Speaker, there really is a way to deliver this entire program and the work that remains to be done much more efficiently. And it starts with that concept of bundling I referred to earlier, reducing the number of projects. For better or worse, historically at the MTA, you sometimes have a separate capital project for a different wire on the same, two different wires on the same subway tunnel wall. That makes no sense. We have to look at these as major undertakings and piggyback all the work that can be done in a single outage. And by doing that, Speaker, we will reduce the number of projects in the capital program from somewhere between 1,400, or in a capital program of this size, maybe 2,000 projects, down to somewhere between 200 and 500 separate projects. So that's number one. Design build. The design build is not only going to allow us to do less time designing a project and get it into the construction phase much faster, but it's going to produce contractor innovation, like the contractor innovation that has allowed us to do the third track project on Long Island so much faster and with less customer and public impact than anybody thought about. Fewer delays, fewer change orders, eliminating all the red tape, which the MTA has burdened itself with, and to some extent the MTA has been burdened with over time, that creates delay after delay on projects. And I have done that on projects. On the third track project on Long Island, it's a $2.5 billion project. We have 25 change orders, and it is a net credit to the MTA. So we're getting money back instead of, on the 2nd Avenue subway, phase 1, 2,400 change orders. You see a change of direction on that. So I'm not going to belabor. There are many other issues that I think we're going to take on that are going to change the direction and make it much more certain that we can deliver more work in a short time. We're going to empower the people who are running projects to make decisions in ways that were never before. We're going to eliminate scope creep and design changes, which have bedeviled major MTA projects, and again, cause cost rises and delays that are part of the source of the problem. And we're going to motivate contractors in a way that's never happened before. I've already cut the payment time for contractors to 15 days for 30 days on all the projects I run. So contractors are giving us better prices and more responsiveness. So you can see we have a very, I hope you'll get a sense we have a very comprehensive strategy for reducing the number of projects so we can get more work done.
Thank you. I know the focus of this hearing is about the capital plan and reorganization, but we need to talk about whether or not we can actually afford to run the system, especially when we're planning on bringing so many new projects online, as you just mentioned, Janno, at once. In 1994, the operating deficit for the MTA was about $11 million. Now it's over $500 million. I hope that the reorganization keeps us from hitting the $1 billion deficit you are projecting for 2023, but I'm not holding my breath. I don't think the advocates are either. And when the MTA has trouble with an operating budget, it is always the riders that bail you out with a fare hike. I don't want to see that happen given the looming deficit on the horizon. One reason that I'm so concerned is that we are adding almost $250 million to the operating budget for 500 new police officers. You are in pretty dire financial straits. Every single decision that impacts the operating budget should be heavily scrutinized so that we are sure that every dollar is doing the most for riders. So how did you get to that number? How did the MTA get to that number? Why 500 officers? Can you share the data and the analysis that the MTA did to determine that that was the right number, and that we actually needed those officers on top of the NYPD officers that are already doing that work in the subways every single day?
So, Speaker, I'm going to ask our CFO to speak to the operating deficit question, and then I'll come back to the police question.
Okay. Thank you. I think it's important to point out that it is not always the answer to go back to the customers and ask for fare and toll increases. We have every 2 years gone forward and projected 4% fare and toll increases. That is less than the rate of inflation. But what has really helped us to be able to address our operating deficits is the fact that we have been reducing costs significantly. We have, by the time we finish the 2023 year, we will have reduced our annual recurring expenditures by more than $3 billion. So since 2010, we will have cut out $3 billion of operating expenses, recurring expenses out of our budget. That's significantly more than we've raised in terms of fare and toll increases. And that's a commitment that we'll continue to make. We're going to look to see where we can be more efficient. The transformation is really important in this regard, because what we're doing is we're taking redundant or duplicative services that have been provided through the years at each of the agencies, and we're combining them so that we don't need 5 different HR departments, we don't need 5 different legal departments, we don't need 5 different accounting departments. We'll be able to combine those into one consolidated group that will serve each of the operating agencies so that the operating presidents can then focus on delivering safe, reliable service to our customers.
But Mr. Foran, aren't you concerned that the number is projected to be over $500 million in an operating deficit? As a chief financial officer, outside agencies that do these type of audits and that look at the financial health of a public authority, they are concerned about the size and scope of this. Are you concerned about what it looks like the operating deficit is going to be for the MTA?
Every 4-year financial plan that we put together since I arrived at the MTA 10 years ago, we've had out-year deficits, sizable out-year deficits, and we work slowly, methodically to reduce costs to address those deficits. So yes, I do think that our financial position is dire, but we are committed to trying to reduce cost in a safe way and so that we can still continue to provide reliable service.
I'm not laughing just because I actually appreciate everything that you've said, but you just, I don't want to paper over it. You just said that the MTA's financial position is dire.
Yes, absolutely.
That's frightening.
Well, I tell you, we are in an unusual situation.
What does that mean, an unusual situation?
Our projected deficit in the July plan, before we had the transformation, was $1 billion. So we have to affect the transformation and the reform effort that the legislature challenged us to do and wrote into the legislation. I think it's interesting that we did not receive any operating aid when the budgets were passed in Albany.
Well, you should have.
Well, I'm just saying, what they did ask us, they gave us capital dollars because it is, and that's what's leading to this, tremendous historic capital program. But I think they wanted us to prove that we could reduce our cost in a responsible way through this transformation so that we would not have to turn immediately for additional operating aid. Now, I believe at some point in time, operating aid is going to be needed, but we need to prove that we can cut our cost and reduce any duplication so that we can be efficient in delivering the service that the customers need.
It's interesting, Pat. Before you go to the police question, Nicole Ydanis had a piece in the Post a couple of weeks ago, and she was referring to the $17.5 billion budget. The MTA faces an $800 million deficit, 5% of spending rising to $2 billion, or more than 10% of spending by 2023. That's without a recession, she says. To fill the gaps, the MTA will take about $150 million built up from previous years, but mostly it proposes a slew of nearly $700 million in, quote, adjustments. Some are fine, such as eliminating vacant back office positions, saving $80 million a year. But another, she says, is just a naked cash grab, not savings. The MTA wants to save about $100 million a year by asking New York City taxpayers to pay more for Accessoride, the inefficient service, the disabled, which is used by the disabled, which runs a $500 million deficit. The MTA has no legal basis, she says, to ask the city for more. Providing public transit to everyone is part of the MTA's core mission. This is no different than when the MTA helped fix its budget crisis last year by forcing the city to fork over $400 million for the subway action plan, which the MTA was doing track and signal repairs. It should have been doing all along. And then she goes on and she says that New Yorkers, New York City residents, already pay the bulk, 3/4 of the $7.5 billion the MTA collects in dedicated taxes and subsidies, like the payroll tax and the real estate transaction taxes. Now we are at a risk for annual random cash grabs by the MTA. And so and then she goes on and talks about the 500 cops, which will be $60 million a year, and that doesn't include overtime or pension costs related to it. So I'm pointing all of that out because it is concerning that this is the financial position that we're in right now, and it seems every year we are sort of jumping to and from trying to come up with an infusion of money here, an infusion of money there to deal with some of the underlying concerns and problems that the MTA is facing. And Pat, I just wanted to hear your general thoughts on that.
So Speaker, first, I didn't expect Nicole Ydanis to get so much airtime at a City Council hearing, but I know she'll be grateful. I would make the following point. The comments that you and the Chairman made in your opening remarks about issues with the MTA in the past and inefficiencies and delayed construction projects and other things, I think have been features of the past, to be sure. The new team here, new focus. The message from the legislature, and I think this was appropriate, was in passing central business district tolling and the other revenues, which I recognize are borne by New York City residents in large part and commuters into New York City. The message in requiring transformation and requiring design build was for the MTA to get its house in order before it came asking for additional operating aid. We've taken that message to heart, we've internalized it, and we're acting on it. The requirement in the legislation that a transformation plan be put together, be approved by the board, that a chief transformation officer be hired, those things have been now done and are critical steps in transforming the MTA, reducing the cost basis, which is not going to be easy, but Bob Foran and his team, working with the agency presidents, have taken a couple of $2 billion of expense out, annual recurring. That's an extraordinary achievement. And we've got more to do to get our house in order before we go, as you noted, asking for additional revenues or support from any taxpayer.
Do you plan on going to Albany this year before the statutory budget deadline of April 1st for the state budget to ask for additional funds for operating the MTA?
Speaker, I think we'll do the same thing in Albany, which we're doing here today, which is to report honestly on progress, to report honestly on challenges, and where we are in the transformation process, which I think is the single most important initiative at the MTA now in terms of reforming the agency and reducing costs.
And I just want to say, I don't agree with the Manhattan Institute on a lot of things, but I do think that Nicole Ydanis is a very smart scholar and someone who has been forward-thinking and looking at transportation and the financial difficulties that the state has faced, the city has faced, the MTA has faced, and I think she's actually been a sort of a siren call ahead of time and looking at areas where the public hasn't had enough sunlight to look at those things.
Speaker, I too hold her in high regard. She's terrific.
We both hold her in high regard.
Good.
If you could just get back to the why 500 cops, and can you share the data and analysis that was done to come up with that number?
Sure. First, principle, we have an obligation to provide a safe and secure environment in the subways, on buses, Metro North, and Long Island Railroad. I'm not going to apologize for that. The expenditure came out in our 4-year capital plan as $250 million or a number like that. The annual expense is a substantial expense, but it's about $50 million. There was consultation with the leadership of the MTA police, who obviously do staffing things. I'll note that of the 500, about 80 of those positions are vacancies, attrition, or unfilled positions. We've got a police force, as many police forces do, with officers who've reached 20, 25, 30 years of service. And there is statistical data that suggests when a police class reaches that level of seniority, X% will retire in the ordinary course of business because of the provisions of police pensions. So there was a whole planning exercise, and that work goes on all the time. The officers that are being hired, that the first waves are about to join the MTA police force, will police New York City Transit, buses, Metro North, and Long Island Railroad. The agencies of, all of the agencies of the MTA. And frankly, we're very focused in, especially given, for instance, the transit workers who were with us this morning, the significant increase in attacks on transit workers who have come to our board meetings and talked about increases in physical assaults and increases in sexual assaults. Very focused on protecting and providing a safe and secure environment for customers and employees alike.
I'm glad you brought that up. I was going to ask, given the uptick of assaults that we've seen on transit workers, is there a specific part of the plan for these officers that deals with that, particularly attacks on buses, given what we've seen?
So there is, we are in conversations with the TWU on the safety issues. I've spoken with the senior leadership of the TWU in the last week on these issues, on the Class D felony legislation, which is already on the books in Albany, and the cries of the transit workers and their leadership, given the increase in assaults on transit workers and sexual assaults, is one that we're taking as a first-order priority.
Is there a plan on how the officers will be deployed? How many will protect workers versus how many will monitor fare evasion?
That plan is being developed. To be honest, I'm not going to get into details on it because I think it would be inappropriate to do that in a public setting. I will say that the officers will be deployed across all MTA agencies.
And are they getting special training on the outreach that's being done for the vulnerable homeless New Yorkers that are struggling, that so many New Yorkers see on subway platforms and in subway cars? Are they receiving specialized training?
Yes, sir. All of the officers in the first waves have gone through the NYPD Police Academy and have gotten the same training that an NYPD recruit and new officer would get. So
is it, Pat, is it not 500 new cops? Is it 500 new cops?
It's 500 hires, yes, sir.
So, I would love for you to share with us the data and analysis that was done to reach that number, on how the MTA figured that out, so we can understand, given that it's a significant expense to the operating budget and riders want to focus on improving service. That's where I think money should be directed. I was someone that wasn't supportive of hiring this, given that we have almost over 2,500 NYPD officers that are currently doing this work. And I think what you see, I don't know if you are monitoring Twitter, but what I see on Twitter as it relates to everyday New Yorkers, not advocates, just random people who are riding the subway, who will see 4, 5, 6, 7 police officers standing outside the turnstiles, watching to see if people are going to evade the fare. It doesn't seem that the current officers are being deployed in a way to actually deal with assaults against transit workers or deal with other major felonies that are happening across the system. Instead, what I think New Yorkers see are 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 cops standing at the turnstiles, and they say, is this what we should be spending money on?
Well, look, I think that the NYPD, which is an incredible police force, and the MTA Police Department, which is an incredible transportation police force, do extraordinary work in a very demanding and challenging environment. I will tell you of the 500 hires that will be put in place by the end of 2020, 80, as I mentioned, are attrition, unfilled positions, and vacancies. Providing a safe and secure environment for the subways, buses, Metro North, and Long Island Railroad is not, in my mind, that I know you weren't suggesting this, Speaker. It's not an option, it's not an add-on, it's not a luxury, it's a fundamental part of providing transit service. I think that given the increase in certain levels of crimes, including attacks on transit workers, but also in assaults generally and in misdemeanor arrests, that this was an appropriate investment. and it will further our goal of providing a safe and secure environment at every agency.
So how much of this had to do with fare evasion versus the issues that you just outlined?
Fare evasion, quality of life, increases in crime. These officers, like all officers, are going to be doing general policing. How they're deployed will depend, will be decisions made by the police leadership at the time, and I'm not going to comment on that. And it will, as it does in the NYPD, those deployments will change depending on the, the order of the day or the circumstances at the time.
I mean, I really question if putting more law enforcement on the subways is really the best option, but just on fare evasion specifically, is the MTA looking at what other cities are doing to deal with fare evasion? The Dutch are focusing on better gate design when people are entering the transit system, getting people to pay and avoiding violent interactions that they may have with people that are trying to crack down on fare evasion. And one city that's outlined in this great article by CityLab, which you all should look at if you haven't read, about what cities across Europe are doing to deal with fare evasion, from the UK to Berlin to all over the Netherlands. In one city, part of your fine actually gets your card loaded with rides. So you pay the fine, and the fine doesn't go to the MTA or to the police. It actually goes toward giving you a card that actually has, I think in this place in Netherlands, this city of 200,000 people, it helps fund 10 rides on a subway card for you to actually encourage you to become a paying customer. We, of course, invested in Fair Fares. We are glad to partner with you on that. To me, it just seems like overkill and that there are better ways to get at this. I just want to hear what the MTA's long-term vision is on dealing with fare evasion is.
Andy.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker. Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
Andy, I'm glad that your resignation letter was not accepted and that you're sitting here today.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Speaker, thank you. Fare evasion is not unique to the MTA. It's a challenge certainly on everywhere I've ever worked, in Railcorp in Australia, in the Tube, at the TTC. It's a global phenomenon, and you raised some good examples there of different ways in which different agencies have tackled it. We can't and we shouldn't just ignore it. And what we should be saying to people is, if you can't afford the fare, not paying for the fare isn't the option, but there is now a laudable, thanks to your leadership, a laudable alternative, namely the Fair Fares initiative. And certainly we don't want to arrest people. We don't want to see people get into trouble. We just want them to pay their fare. Why? Because A, that's fair, F-A-I-R, on other people that do pay, and B, it means it's not revenue foregone that can be put into improving service, which is what we all want. In terms of the actual deployment of officers, that has to be equitable. We are looking at ways to design out the vulnerability, though, the Achilles heel, if you like, of our system. And we do have, and I can't say I've seen it anywhere else, a particular weakness in our station design, and that is the secondary gate that is a feature at all of our subway stations. It's there for a reason. It's there to allow quick egress off platforms. It's part of the fire code. But of course, when people are coming out, people can go in. So one thing I'm very familiar with, and I've got my team having a look at the moment, is wide gates that still enable you to go into the station by using your smart card, and of course we're getting a smart card, a wide gate that would not only mean that you could then enter through paddles and you can't come out the other way, but that you would be able to go through that where you're in a wheelchair, if you had a stroller, for example, or if you had a load of luggage. So that's something that progressively I think we need to do. I would like to see us move to a proof of payment system whereby as long as you have proof of payment throughout your journey, then that's fine. So again, it's taking the emphasis off arresting people, but it is saying that if in the future one of our inspectors boards a bus and we ask you for proof of payment, and that can easily be achieved with a smart card, we will expect you to A, have paid in the first place, and B, to have paid the right amount. So I think one of the advantages of having worked elsewhere is I am familiar with a lot of these solutions. We are actively looking at them. The one with the loaded card is interesting. We could take a look at that. I do, though, counsel against things like, and I know you didn't suggest this, in the past I've worked places where people have said, you should just have the inspectors, they shouldn't arrest people, they should just sell you a ticket there and then. I disagree with that, because where's the deterrent? You will still chance it because you know that there's no downside to being caught. All that happens is if you get caught, say 1 in 10 times, you have to pay. So there is a lot of thought going into this. We don't don't want to arrest people, but we can't just let $260 million or more walk out of the door.
I understand we don't want to lose that revenue, but I also have a concern about over-policing and criminalizing poverty for New Yorkers. And I would love for the MTA to come back at some point and give sort of a broader vision on other tools to look at on fare evasion for the long term for the MTA, given that it's a persistent problem in New York City and in other municipalities around the world, as you mentioned, Andy, taking a look at what other cities have done successfully in eliminating the huge number in fare evasion, but also not having the primary tool be an interaction with law enforcement and figuring out, maybe through a pilot program or other ways, what we can do. Pat, are you open to looking, maybe you already are, looking at these things that the MTA could be doing?
Yeah, Speaker, the one thing of course we're open. The one thing I would add to Andy's comments, which I think were comprehensive, is on the funding side. DA Vance from the New York County DA's Asset Forfeiture Fund allocated $40 million to exploring these two new technologies, some of the technologies that Andy described, and to help defray the cost of policing. But we're open to exploring all of these things, and as Andy just showed, he's on top of the technology around the country and around the world.
And then lastly, just on this police question, are we putting a proportional number of officers on Long Island Railroad or Metro North trains, or is it just focused on New York City Transit?
Every agency, Speaker.
Every agency.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Speaker, may I just add one other comment? I think is pertinent. I think, again, you just speaking from experience, it seems to me that what you really need to do with any fare evasion problem is you will always have, and it's, again, not unique to New York, you see it elsewhere, there will be a percentage of people who are determined not to pay the fare, whether that's because they don't agree that they should have to pay a fare, they're mad at the transit system or whatever. They are people sort of hardcore, they absolutely set out not to pay the fare. At the other end of the spectrum, you've got the vast majority of decent, honest people who just it would be anathema to them not to pay, to evade the fare. So you've got two ends of the spectrum there: people that set out not to pay, and people for whom that's never an option. In the middle, you've got what I call chancers, and to me, that's the big opportunity here. Quite often, they're people who can pay the fare, but who on a particular day, for whatever reason, take a chance. So an effective strategy has three main elements. Number one, for those people who just can't afford the fare, there should be a lower fare option. And thanks to your leadership and that of City Council, we now have that. Tick. Check. Good. That's great. Number two, you should have a very high likelihood, or a pretty high likelihood, and typically the accepted practice is perhaps one journey in three, but you should have a high likelihood that at some point on your journey you will have your ticket inspected, that we will check that you have actually paid. And number three, if you are found not to have paid or not to have paid the correct amount, the penalty should be pretty high. And that's how you deal with what I call the chances, because if you really think the chances are you're probably going to get checked, you can afford it, and the penalty, though, is pretty high, then you will deter those chances. And that's, in my professional opinion, how you deal with this in an equitable manner.
Chancers is British English, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Pat, and thank you, Andy. Okay, I'm going to try to finish up here so I can turn it over to the chair. I'm going to try to rifle through, get through some things very quickly. Currently, the 2015 to 2019 capital plan calls for $8.6 billion in state funding and $2.7 billion in city funding. We're at the tail end of it here, the tail end of the current capital plan that we're in. So of the state's $8.6 billion, can you tell us how much money the MTA has received from the state and how much you've spent out of that $8.6 billion?
Of that money, we have committed against, meaning let contracts on almost $5 billion of that.
How much have you received?
We've received and spent about $800 million on that.
No. Out of the $8.6 billion, how much has the MTA received from the state into the MTA's coffers out of that $8.6 billion?
That's the number I just gave you, sir.
You've received $5 billion.
No, we've committed. Wait just one second.
I don't understand the difference between committed and received.
Just talk about committed.
Yep. Committed, we can't enter into a contract unless we have a source of funding identified.
Just explain this to me. When you get money from the state or from the city, either one, and we say, the city says, we're giving you $2.7 billion. I expect the city's transferring $2.7 billion to the MTA so that you all can use and spend that money. Out of the $8.6 billion that the state said they were giving you or gave you or appropriated to you in the current capital plan, how much of that $8.6 million has been transferred into the MTA's fund to be able to spend the money?
We have received, again, about $800 million that we have spent.
Where is the other $7.8 billion?
It's yet to come.
Mr.
Speaker, if you recall, in the last capital program, the money to come from the city and the money to come from the state was to be received at the back end of the capital program.
But we're at the back end.
Yes, and that's where the money is starting to come in.
So
we expect to receive all of the state's money within the next couple of years, and we expect to receive the city's money. Sir, the city's money is yet to come in as well.
Well, the city should give you the money, and the state should give you the money, and they should give it to you in the current capital plan that it's in. This capital plan's ending in 30 days or something.
No. The way the capital program works is we commit money. Okay.
Yes.
We have 5-year periods. The spending typically takes place over an 8 or 9-year period. And I have to point out on this capital program, we started 18 months late. So really, we're 2/3 of the way through a capital program. So we started 18 months late in funding.
Because of CPR.
Yeah, because the CPR program was not approved.
Mr. Foran, I am glad you're here today because you're explaining this in a way that I understand, but the average New Yorker who wants to understand how the MTA works, their head would spin to understand the difference between committed, received, this capital plan, that capital plan, it rolls into this, the CPR. I mean, there has to be a better way to explain this and do this for the public, especially when we're throwing around huge numbers of $8.6 billion and $2.7 billion. And when the city and state makes that commitment, as they should, as I'm glad they did, that money needs to be given to the MTA in a timely manner so that Janno, when he is bundling projects to get the projects done on time and in an expedited manner and to bring costs down, that he actually has that money to play with and is not waiting for it on the back end.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree. And that's why on this upcoming capital program, the 20 to 24 capital program, we're asking the city and we're asking the state for $3 billion each to come in and provide the funding. That's our ask.
Yeah, but Mr. Foran, I'm glad you brought that up. Last time the state gave you $8.6 billion, right? In the last capital plan.
They committed.
The current capital plan, committed 8.6.
Yes.
The city committed 2.7.
Yes.
Now you're coming to us, to the city, and saying you want $3 billion from us, so $300 million more. I mean, I have to understand more before I say we should do that, but fine, that makes sense. $2.7 billion to $3 billion. The state's going from $8.6 billion to $3 billion. Why?
Because between the state and the city and the legislature's enactment, we have. Sorry, what?
Okay.
We have central business district tolling, we have the internet tax, and we have the mansion tax, totaling $25 billion that we're receiving. The extra $6 billion dedicated for accessibility being asked of the city and of the state is part of that.
But that money, for that $25 billion is what the total amount is when you bond the central business district tolling money. That is coming from New Yorkers. That's coming basically from New York City streets. So it's coming from New York. It's not coming from the state legislature or sort of a general state legislative fund or the state's budget.
So, Speaker, can I make?
Yeah.
Can I make 2 points? One is with respect in the 2015 to 2019 capital plan, the current one, which started 18 months late, as Bob noted, because of the delay in the approval by the Capital Program Review Board. We expect, and it's been our experience, that every dollar that the state of New York and the city of New York committed to the capital plan is available, appropriated, authorized, and when we ask for it to be committed or spent, it will be so. And that has been our experience so far. With respect to the city of New York and state of New York's commitment to capital plans in the past, if we start with the 2015 plan and the 2020 plan, the city of New York will have committed about $6 billion in total, and the state of New York will have committed about 12 in total. If you look at all the approved capital programs going back to 1982 when Mr. Ravitch was the chair of the MTA, and excluding the 2020 to 24 plan, the city of New York has provided about $13.2 billion in capital to all those capital plans, and the state of New York has provided 34.9.
And I'd also need to point out, all of the money coming from the state has been appropriated. It's fully appropriated. And that's why we are able to let contracts against it, and that's why we're starting to spend money against those contracts. So we feel very comfortable that we're going to receive the money that the state has promised in the 15 to 19 capital program, just as we feel comfortable that we're going to receive the money that the city has committed. And we are now working with the city to identify projects that they will fund. But for the extraordinary commitments that were made in the 15 to 19 capital program, where we received significantly more additional funds, the agreement was that those monies would come in at the end of the capital program, and the monies are starting to flow, and we do appreciate it, and we are spinning against it, and I'm confident it's going to come in.
So why should the city make its capital funding available earlier in the plan than the states?
Good question.
Well, not earlier than the states.
No, it's coming in at the same time on the second capital program. And what the ask is of both the city and the state is this time we'll first spend the money against the central business tolling district revenue that's been identified. We'll spend the money that's coming in from the sales tax, and we'll spend the money that's coming in from the mansion tax. Once those monies are committed against and we're spending those dollars, that's when we're going to ask the city and the state to provide the funding, $6 billion, as requested. Then the MTA will sell $9.7 billion worth of additional debt, but it will do it at the end of the capital program, just as this time we did it on the front end of the capital program. And the reason we're making that request is we're just trying to push as far off as possible anything that would have pressure on the fare box.
So why should the city give the MTA the additional money when you haven't finished your current plan?
Because we're starting committing against the next plan.
So Speaker, I think there are two answers to that question, and then I'll turn it over to Janno. Answer one is the $3 billion from the state and the $3 billion from the city of New York are dedicated to accessibility investments with respect to the city's investment entirely to accessibility investments in the subways. The second point is the point that Bob just made. Doing this, and this is consistent with the theme that in your opening remarks about pressure on the operating budget, delaying the MTA piece, the $9 billion that Bob just described, will reduce the operating the pressure on the operating budget from increased debt service. We will delay it and therefore reduce it. But the programmatic point is that the $3 billion from the state and the $3 billion from the city will be dedicated to accessibility.
Okay, I have my final question. The new capital plan includes $10 billion in funding from new revenue sources, as you mentioned, Mr. Foran, including a progressive tax on the transfer of high-end real estate and the elimination of the internet tax advantage. This funding represents 18% of the total funding of the capital plan that we're discussing today, the next capital plan. Could you tell us how much revenue you expect to get from each of these new sources and how you arrived at these estimates?
Those are based upon budget, New York State Division of Budget numbers. I think it's 320 from one source on an annual basis and about $370 million a year on an annual basis. So in total, about $690 million.
Pat, I'm gonna hopefully throw you a little T-ball question here. Why should New Yorkers feel good about the current state of where things are at the MTA? I mean, you've said a bunch of times, and again, you and I have a very good relationship, and I respect you tremendously, as well as Janno and Andy, and now Bob Foran, given that he's here today. But you've said we brought in a new team, so it sort of sounds like we have a new team, trust us. But given all of the financial issues, given the questions around the financial plan, given the lack of transparency, what would you say to the public on why they should feel confident about the MTA's direction, about the proposed capital plan, even with, as Mr. Foran said, we're in a dire financial situation as it relates to the MTA, an overarching answer to why the public should feel confident about the MTA right now?
So, Speaker, rather than talking about aspirations or what we're going to do or what we might do in 2020 or 21, I want to talk about what we're doing now. So I mentioned in my opening remarks, the L train is on time and on budget, thanks to work by Janno and his team and Andy Byford and his team. The second track, the Long Island Railroad project, is on time and on budget. The third track was delivered a year early.
The second track was delivered.
The second track was delivered a year early, forgive me. Omni, the new fare payment system, is being rolled out. It's on budget. We report that to CPOC and the board and the public regularly. It's on time, it's on budget. Central Business District tolling infrastructure, we plan to bring to the board this month in November. We actually brought it in October, a month early. The contract with the selected vendor in a competitive RFP was signed early. The design, we gave the contractor the instructions notice to proceed on the design. That is proceeding. Each of these are incredibly important projects we're working on now, and L-Train, second track, third track, Omni, Central Business District tolling are examples of where the MTA is not performing in the way that you and other important elected officials have appropriately criticized. We've got a lot more work to do. We've got a huge transformation to go through. We've got a lot of expense cuts to make. But these are examples on major projects that we're either working on now or in the time that this new team has been in place are on time and on budget.
What do you think about municipal control of the subways and buses, Pat?
So, Speaker, it's a very complicated issue. I would note the following. First, I think your proposal was interesting and provocative. I think the points I would make would be the following. One question would be regional taxes like the payroll mobility taxes and other things which are fundamental components of the MTA's financial structure today are a byproduct of the fact that the MTA is a state agency. So figuring out a way to replace those, I think, would be unbelievably challenging. Second is, obviously, most transportation policy in the state of New York is set by the state legislature. And then third, long before any of our times, the subways and buses were run by the city of New York.
Until Governor Rockefeller took it away from Mayor Lindsay.
In 1969, correctly. But the circumstances leading to the takeover was, for instance, a long period of time where the subway fare was not increased. That may have been an equitable thing to do, but obviously had a significant impact on the financial condition of New York City Transit at the time, and I would suggest had a significant impact on the ridership experience. I think it's a very complicated issue that'll be decided at levels significantly above my pay grade by elected officials in Albany and here at the City Council. For now, we are proceeding with the assumption that the MTA's current structure and authorizing legislation will continue, and we're pushing forward with improving service, improving customer service, and transformation. So
I'll finish with it. I assume, Pat, you're glad that Andy Byford is still here. Amen. I don't want to make him uncomfortable, but I assume you're glad he's still here.
Amen. I look forward to working with him.
So how did you convince him to retract that resignation letter that none of us have been able to see to understand why he wanted to resign?
So Speaker, in my mind, use a British phrase, I think that's chalk and cheese, and I think that's long past us.
Well, I want to see Andy to be empowered. I think he's brought a tremendous amount of confidence from the riding public to the MTA. He and I did not discuss this. He's blushing and looking away as I say this because I think that's the type of person that he is. But I think it was very dispiriting and upsetting for New Yorkers to see that potentially he was leaving. And I'm glad, Pat, with your leadership, you were able to convince him to stay. I'm sad that Ronnie is leaving. I'm happy for her in retirement, but she's been a great person to work with and has a great career in serving New Yorkers. And I want Andy Byford to stay, to be empowered, to not have New York City Transit be weakened in this transformation plan. The City Council, I think I could speak for the vast majority of us, has tremendous confidence in his leadership, in his vision, in his formulating the Fast Forward plan. I want to give a shout out to Sarah Meyer, who's done a tremendous job in customer service at the MTA under Andy, and I just want to leave you with that today, and I hope you understand the gravity of that comment that I give, because I think literally millions of New Yorkers are watching and are grateful for Andy Byford's service and leadership and vision at New York City Transit.
So, Speaker, I look forward to working with Andy and Sarah Meyer and their colleagues for a long period of time. I think the success of the subway action plan, thanks to funding from the state and the city, the dramatic increase in on-time performance, and the increase in ridership speak for themselves.
Pat, thank you for being here. Janno, Andy, Bob, and I really appreciate this long, extended back and forth today. I look forward to following up with specific questions to Janno on the projects, the cost overruns, the bundling, the sequencing, the phasing, all of that to understand what's going to happen in the future. And with that, I turn it over to Chair Rodriguez. I apologize for taking so much time, but Pat told me he's available to be here until about 11 o'clock tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Speaker. We look forward to coming back.
Thank you, Speaker. And before asking a question, I'm going to say que en el día de hoy la audiencia que estamos sosteniendo es muy importante para nosotros discutir lo que tiene que ver con el presente y el futuro de la transportación de Nueva York, un sistema que le ha fallado muchas veces en el pasado a las comunidades de inmigrantes, en la comunidad de escasos recursos económicos, como son lugares de Washington Heights, del sur del Bronx, Queens, Brooklyn, en Staten Island. Y que nosotros esperamos que la MTA en el día de hoy discuta con nosotros un mejor plan de cómo vamos a hacer la transportación algo asequible para todos los neoyorquinos. I believe that having Senator leaders Theo Cousin and Cal Hastings make a big difference to get the criminal justice reform and the new housing law that we pass, because they come from places that represent the underserved community. I do have issue when you say we are the leadership of the MTA and there's no diversity there. I feel that it makes a difference, and we should address it. Most of the individuals that you're mentioning doesn't reflect the New York City that we have in 2019, which is 29% Latino, 27% Afro-American, 15% Asian. And you know, the new leadership of our society, we have to be very careful, because there's a new wealth or youth, people who are not yet the organizing who took Socari Park. That movement didn't die at the park. That movement is spreading through the whole society. And they will continue getting into the subway, demanding free transportation. They will continue getting into the subway, say, we don't need to have any police officer using their power. And they will be in thousands. And then we question why and how do we react. And I feel that we, all of us who are in position of power, inherit a society that we are comfortable in being in places without diversity. Diversity of the color of the skin, diversity with the gender. And I just hope that the MTA that we want to see reorganized for the future, because we cannot leave the MTA of the past behind. The MTA is still there. The MTA that failed on transparency. The MTA that fails on accountability. the MTA that failed, overpricing a lot of work that they did. The MTA that only used 2 private sector to do, corporation to do most of the job, even though there was like a 10 that could do the job, that could reduce the cost. And that's why when the 125th, this drill happened, I did call for a forensic audit of the MTA. And in your case, you were not in the position where you are today. So this is not only about an individual, this is about an institution. So how comfortable can we be running an institution that we know that there's no diversity in leadership or people that they can bring different experience? And let me put it this way, let me make it more easy. You can throw some name, some number. It is better to accept it that that's the challenges. Because to try to justify, it will not be accepted by the 100,000 of people who are following the conversation that we have in the city of New York. We have a problem. Because society today is thinking that segregation is over because we changed the law. It doesn't happen if we don't change the culture. So here we are, and as you know, I will be the first one advocating for more resources. But I have issue with lack of leadership, with lack of diversity in the leadership of the MTA. You can throw Freddie, who was there, you can throw another name, but let's look at the other faces. Where is the Latino in this room? What is the diversity of black? And you don't have to be black or Latino, Asian to represent everyone. But everyone would like to see people that bring their experience to the table. So how can we, as we are getting ready, like 40 days, we start, seeing the MTA implementing probably one of the most ambitious plan of $54 billion, also ready to share with the city of New York that as you are making changes on how and where to invest it, that also you're making changes on diversity or leadership that reflect the city of New York.
I might just start, Mr. Chairman, if I may, because I fully agree with you, and I pride myself on, both in my last role at the Toronto Transit Commission, but also here at New York City Transit, which obviously is the most pertinent or relevant agency for this building, because we provide subway and bus service throughout the city. So on merit, I'm actually very proud of the executive team that I have built. And again, it is on merit. We have the first woman ever to lead the subway in Sally Librera. Our Chief Customer Officer is with us today, Sarah Meyer. I have on my executive for the first time ever a wheelchair user, Alex Elagudin, who I think hopefully you would agree has made a huge amount of difference in pushing forward, driving the accessibility part of Fast Forward, a full quarter of the Fast Forward plan. Across my executive, but also the next layer down, I think we have tremendous diversity in terms of gender, race, physical ability, and sexual orientation. And that also manifests itself in our GSM team, the group station managers who are now placed across the system. There's 22 of them around the system. Again, on merit, they were chosen to reflect the city that they serve. And so you only have to look at the pictures on the stations, because again, it's about accountability. And you will see black faces, you will see Asian faces, you will see Latino faces. And so again, I'm very proud of my executive. Certainly, I can't speak for the MTA as an entity, because I don't lead that. But for New York City Transit, we have an incredibly capable, highly diverse executive that has been chosen on merit. And I think the results speak for themselves and reinforce your very valid point that it's not just the right thing to do to have diversity in your management team. It's the smart thing to do, because a diverse team creates far better business outcomes, and I'm very proud of what we've achieved so far.
That diversity reflects the New York City or the 1900 census that was 96% white, only 2% black, and Latino were not counted. That diversity doesn't reflect the New York City of today. That is 29% Latino, 27% Afro-American. more than 50% Asian. And it's not having anyone as a token because we want to fulfill the space. It's about that we need to push harder in the process of recruiting because we want to make the MTA, the best one, the best model in the nation. And for me, this is a big one. When we have area, the South Bronx, 750,000 people, 500,000 Latinos, most of them poor. I want my two daughters to know that there's leaders in the top institution that has a value of $1 trillion of people who look like them. So I'm happy to see, changes. I'm happy to see, I think that people should be hired, recruit based on capacity. That's what we're pushing for. But this is not only about the MTA. It's something about nationwide, but in citywide. So I just hope again that for me it means a lot because especially now as we are addressing, train station, where are we giving priority? Yes, like everyone use Times Square. All of us use Columbus Circle. It's important for the economy. But also, stop at the 149 and 3rd Avenue at night. Stop at Euron and 170. Live at the Diamond Houses and have a need to go to Riverdale in a wheelchair. You have to go down to 96th Street in the one train because that's the next station with the elevator in order to go up to 231st. And here we are, putting the new elevator at the 168. And I know about you as a new person in the city, someone that, I'm not gonna say I don't know how, I feel that you became open, you're not shy about people's frustration. And it's not only on your decision, but yes, that elevator on 168, money, technology is there to deal with the rock. And those elevators should be going down to the platform. Instead of leaving elevator, the new one, like a one-shot, one opportunity, investing millions and millions of dollars in an area. The institution is important for the students going to Columbia Medical School, the resident, the patient. If you will be taking the one train elevator, with the new one, with a group ribbon cutting, elevator still will continue going to the same area and not going down to the platform, to being accessible to 1 million New Yorkers with physical challenges. So I feel again that diversity of voices and experiences is important, but let me also move into that question.
Chairman, can I just make two comments, if I would? For those looking for accessibility investment, this plan will spend $5.2 billion on accessibility in the subways and cover 70 new stations. Fast Forward was 50. We've taken it now to a new limit. We believe this is the largest single capital plan investment made by any agency in accessibility in the United States. On the diversity issue, Andy talked about hiring at New York City Transit. I just wanted to make this point. I know this is important to you and your colleagues. The MTA is by far the most efficient organization in terms of MWBE spending and investment in the capital plan. And over the last several years on the existing capital plan, we've made MWBE awards north of $1 billion. Michael Gardner, who many of you know, is the senior leader who leads that effort. And I think, frankly, he is the best.
Chairman, but that's just another angle, the question, question of diversity about position of leadership at the institution.
Yes.
And even on the WB, I think that's, it takes us to another question, which a lot of changes have to be made because there's a different way of how public and private are able to make the number without going to the real men, Black, Latino, and women. There's a different way of how corporation being established in partnership and be able to come out with the numbers. So, that is even another area.
Yes.
I have seen good progress, but I feel that, we should definitely look at new reforms to get the MWE to really go to people who live in those communities that need to create the more and more jobs. With the 500 new police officers, my first question is, how many men and women do we have right now
700,
enforcement patrolling the?
in the MTA police, approximately 780, a number like that.
Okay, so one new law that we passed at the council is that now because of previous negative experience, that someone called 911, I remember a few years ago there was a person killed by the police at Vermilion Avenue in Inwood, and there was a 911 phone call, the person was saying, send me a police officer, I want to kill them. However, the unit who replied to that phone call was not trained to deal with mental health. So it's not just about the average training that all police officers will receive. Do you anticipate, especially now the MTA during the cold winter, being a destination for people that don't have a place where to live? We have a lot of people also dealing with mental health issues, that when there's cases that involve someone in mental health issue, not only the men and women, the NYPD, the police officer will be responding there, but is there a specialized unit that respond on mental health cases that is the one that go and interact with those cases?
So, Chairman, the new MTA police officers that are being hired next month and into 2020 will have gone through the NYPD Academy, or will be already fully sworn officers, some members of the NYPD or other regional police forces, and will have received exactly the same training.
But there's not, the city of New York right now
Yes.
established the new law that when there's a case that involves someone with mental health issue, the first one that responds to interact is the unit that been trained only to respond in those cases. Is there a unit inside working with and in the MTA that is also specialized to respond with cases of people that have mental health issues?
So Chairman, today, and I suspect in the incident that you just described, the response came from the NYPD, which is primary responsibility for policing the subways. I will come back to you on the question about the MTA Police Department unit or approach for interacting with the emotionally disturbed.
Okay. With the 51, and I don't want to get into the specific on which station in particular, but for the $51 billion capital, what percentage will be used for maintenance and repair in stations located in underserved communities?
Chairman, I'm sorry, stations located,
In underserved communities.
Can I just check when you say underserved communities?
The working class community.
How are you defining that, though? That's a very broad definition with respect. I mean, what's your definition such that we
40% of New Yorkers live in poverty,
Right.
and they live in particular zip code.
Sure.
And they live around 149 3rd Avenue, Giron 170, Burnside and Giron. They live in places in Washington Heights. They live in those communities, not the wealthy in the middle class community.
Understood. So this capital plan will make investments across the whole city in terms of re-signaling, in terms of making stations accessible, in terms of transforming bus service. The bus redesigns cover every route across the whole city, in terms of station modernizations, in terms of other physical upgrades of infrastructure, the whole city. So I mean, we'd have to compare your definition against the budget to give you a specific amount, but the headline is this is designed to modernize the whole of New York City transit, and that includes those areas that you rightly reference.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, obviously in the ADA, and Andy and his team, together with some important stakeholders, did the selection of the initial 50 stations. But broadly speaking, historically, the investment in ADA accessibility has been in the center of the system, in the so-called the 100 stations that received disproportionate volume of ridership, and those tended to be in Manhattan. So this plan, in addition to the principle that Andy has laid out of having an accessible station no more than 2 stations away, it will be disproportionately reaching into the boroughs outside of Manhattan and into some of the communities referenced in your question.
Mr. Chairman, the reason that's important, again, to build upon what Janno's just said, the methodology that we applied, and there's actually advocates here who very usefully work with us on applying those methodologies, was designed to ensure that going forward for accessibility, you'll be no more than 2 stops away from an accessible station within 5 years, which is a huge step forward from where we currently are. In fact, by going beyond the fast forward commitment of 50 stations, and you only needed 36 scientifically deployed to make that no more than 2 stations away. We're having 70. We won't be far off no more than 1 station away. So by definition, a lot of that money and a focus will be targeted to outside Manhattan, precisely because those areas have fewer elevators. So that I would like to think gives you assurance that we're spending this money and applying this focus across the whole system. What we will do is use census tracts to come back with a specific percentage allocation against the money that's being targeted. We can work that out for you. But again, it's important to note that because we wanted to achieve that objective, de facto, the extremities of the city will get more elevators. They have to in order for us to achieve no more than 2, possibly even no more than 1 stop away from an accessible station within an unprecedented time frame.
And likewise, every one of the lines that's receiving resignaling under the proposed capital plan reaches into what you just described as working class communities. The AC line obviously serves central Brooklyn as well as the northern reaches of Manhattan. You've got the Lexington Avenue line, which some people think of as being in the east side of Manhattan line, but you know, Chairman, that serves huge numbers of people in the Bronx and continuing into central Brooklyn. So each of the lines that's receiving resignaling that will allow it to deliver faster, better, and more frequent service is touching the communities of your particular concern.
I just hope that as we will be celebrating Martin Luther King 2 months from now, his birthday, that beside going to masses to celebrate him, we also dream on his dream to bring social justice to transportation. And I remember when the governor, came to Manhattan Center, and many of you were there. And one thing that I like about his presentation was about we need to deal with the reality. There's a crisis. So the first thing that we need to realize that immigrants in working class neighborhood have been left out. If you as resident of some community, why do you think that the train station is not well maintained and protected? They will say, because most of us are working class and immigrants. And I just hope again that we use this opportunity. Life gives that chance for us to leave the fingerprints. If not, we're going to be doing business as usual. Another chair, another New York City Transit, we just pass by. There's a real issue of inequality in New York City. Yes, all of us will be using the train station here in Manhattan, but there's the forgotten stations. I was waiting for the bus at Giron and 170. It was like 40 minutes, like 11 p.m. waiting for the bus. Yes, imagine people who live in transportation desert area, that they need to walk 10 blocks away from the train station to their apartments. A teacher that wants to make a difference, teaching in a neighborhood where they also need to walk 10 blocks. And I know that this is top priority for you. I just want to highlight it, the importance that you look, and especially from the state in your leadership, we're good on doing PowerPoint presentation. I would like to see something around how with the new $54 billion, we are addressing, giving priority to working class, underserved community, No, I'm not thinking about bringing the new station. It's not building, at least maintaining for people to feel safe when they take any station. A station in Columbus Circle, at 116 and Broadway, around Columbia University, should be as safe and as clean as a train station, 2 train at 149 in Grand Concourse, where we have Osto Community College. Where we have the Lincoln Center that I know that you have your plan, but there's no elevator in that station.
Right. This is a plan for New York City. It's not a plan for Manhattan. This plan deliberately has one full quarter of it addressed to accessibility, which goes across the whole city. It also, and across all 5 boroughs. It also has detail of how we will progressively re-signal the whole subway across all 5 boroughs. It has a further quarter dedicated to the redesign of bus routes and bus service by talking to the people across all 5 boroughs. In my job, I go across all 5 boroughs. So I'm entirely, Mr. Chairman, on the same page as you.
We are, and that's why we've been, from day one, we like what you bring to the city, and definitely would like to be working with you. But also, we just need to know that we need to be sure that we address, again, those 2 pieces that for, not only for me, and for those who are the Black and Latino and Asian, everyone should be committed to bring leadership at the top, diversity at the top, and everyone should be committed to saying the train station, the buses that run through the underserved community should be the same as anyone that run through the upper class community. My next question is about how much does the federal government contribute to our transportation system that is important not only for the city economy, but is key for the nationwide economy?
How much are we assuming in the current plan? Approximately $10 billion.
Can you explain, if you don't mind, are those $10 billion going to a specific project? I know that some of that is for the Second Avenue subway, but.
So Mr. Chairman, about nearly $8 billion is federal formula and flex, and we've assumed federal New Starts grant for Second Avenue subway Phase 2 of slightly under $3 billion. We believe the assumptions about the federal formula and flex are appropriate. They're based on recent levels of funding, of federal funding. We're not assuming an increase. I think there's a substantial case to be made that New York City and New York State do not receive their fair share of federal transportation funding. But our assumption for this capital plan is approximately $10 billion. And the competitive grant funding piece of that would be for the expansion of Second Avenue subway into Harlem, which obviously would take subway or bring subway service for the first time to a transit desert.
Yeah, I guess, and how much is that plan also anticipate that we can for the expansion of the Second Avenue subway?
The total cost? Yeah, defer to Janno. The total projected cost is $6 billion, and I would add to you, we're not just asking the federal government for money. We've gone through multiple phases of reviews by the federal experts at USDOT and their own consultants, and they've actually given New York high marks in the plan for the Second Avenue subway, in addition to the fact that it's overdue that we make good on the commitment to the people of East Harlem who've been waiting since the 30s and 40s when we knocked down the elevated trains to have first-class mass transit. But we have convinced the federal government that we rate high on their system, and we're cheaper on a per-rider basis than almost everywhere else, because we have so many people who want to use that Second Avenue subway Phase 2 in East Harlem and Central Harlem. And this project is ready to go. It rates highly on the federal scale, and it deserves the money.
But it's difficult not to have any doubt of that money when all we know, based on what I know, is that it's based about the guy in D.C. who say in a Twitter that he will support bringing funding for the expansion of the Second Avenue subway, right?
Yeah.
Or let me put it this way. Is there any concrete and solid commitment in writing by D.C. that they will fully fund the extension, the expansion of the Second Avenue subway?
No, what we've been going through the process. This is a normal federal process for a competitive grant of this size. And let me add, Mr. Chairman, in the United States, projects of this magnitude, of a new subway line, are always built with federal support. But we've stepped through the various hoops, and now we're waiting for the next step for the federal government to approve us to enter the next phase.
But we don't have the money.
We don't have it absolutely locked up, but we've received high marks, as I said, and there's no reason not to say to the federal government, you ought to give it to us.
Well, with the guy that we have in D.C., we never know what happens tomorrow. We never know what another Twitter he will send tomorrow. If he get mad with Senator Schumer, if he get mad with Congressman Nadler, who've been the voices of advocating on transportation. So I get what you say. This is about institution. But the fact that we are putting that dollars or no as projection of money that we will have, not based on, we can say, we can dispute the city and the state when the capital money will come. But we are saying in that budget, we are also counting with number that we don't have anything in writing from DC that they will fund the expansion of the Second Avenue to 125th.
And absolutely, and we're not going to let the federal government off the hook, but I respect your point. It's not certain.
Okay, and with that, have you tried, because there's one thing that this guy been taking advantage from DC is to do good for his businesses. And many of those businesses are in New York City, and his partners too. Have you tried to work with the public-private sector to see if from DC there's a commitment to get the dollar to expand it to the South Bronx?
I don't know that, there's an option for future phases to continue to the South Bronx, but what I would say to you, Chairman, is one, we have worked closely with the business community, especially the East Harlem Chamber of Commerce and other East Harlem businesses to support this application. As far as the Bronx goes, the idea of connecting to the Bronx, that area where the connection was going to be made, we actually are funding in this capital program proposal as part of the Penn Station Access project that would bring Metro-North commuter rail service to the entire East Bronx.
I'm sorry. I'm just focusing on the Second Avenue that right now.
Right. It's the same tracks. It's the same trackage that had been thought of as a potential connection for the Second Avenue subway, the same right-of-way. So my point to you is we do have a plan for connecting that same area of the South Bronx into provide additional commuter and mass transit service, and it is funded in this project through the Penn Station Access project.
So you think it's possible that Second Avenue get funded not only to 125th, but to get funded up to the South Bronx?
No, I think my point is that I think Second Avenue funded to 125th is real, and we should continue pushing for it. But in this program, we're serving the same area that was hoped to be funded in one version of Second Avenue, Phase 3 or 4, in the existing Penn Station Access project, which we have in this plan.
Okay. And my last question now, before calling my colleague, is about the system has seen an increase or ridership recently. And how are you, looking? What do you attribute that increase or ridership to? And how you maintain gain in the OTP?
Thank you for the question. I would attribute it to the fact that service is becoming more reliable. When you cast your mind back, Mr. Chairman, to January of 2018, the on-time performance statistic was an embarrassing 58% of trains arriving within 5 minutes of their booked time. Only, as the Chairman said earlier on, just a couple of months ago, we actually achieved 84% on-time performance, and we've now hit over 80% performance 5 months in a row. So the service is definitely stabilizing. We have, as the Chairman said, we have introduced new signaling on the 7 line, and that line went up from around 63% punctuality to 90% punctuality. So the Subway Action Plan, the Save Seconds campaign, all of these things are benefiting customers who are noticing quicker journey times, less disruption, fewer major incidents, quicker response times. So people do feel now, certainly my interaction with customers every day on the subways, that people do say to me they are noticing a difference, and so therefore that's attracting them back to the subway. Meanwhile, on the buses, let's take the 14th Street as an example. We've seen a 34% increase in ridership on 14th Street since, in conjunction with yourselves at the city and with DOT, and I'd like to thank Polly Trottenberg for her invaluable support and that of her team. We've now achieved a huge percentage increase in the average speed of the service end to end. The journey time is down. Customers are flocking back to what was a route in decline. There was a precipitous decline in that bus service before. And if I cite a second bus example, the Staten Island Express network, where we redesigned it in conjunction with the community, already customers are noticing increased reliability, faster average speed, and shorter journey time as a result of the work that we've done, which we're now replicating in the Bronx, and we're underway in Queens, and we're underway in Brooklyn. So I think progressively, as you attend to the base reliability of the service, you drive up punctuality of the service, the great work that Sarah and her team's doing to make customer information better. We've had a push on cleanliness. There's a lot to making a transit system attractive, and we're actively targeting all of the key points, and that's what's bringing people back to buses and subways. There's a long way to go, but we intend to continue on that upward trajectory.
I'm sorry. With a fair fare, providing 50% discount to New Yorkers living on poverty line, will you support a plan to expand the fair fare to provide 100% discount to New Yorkers living on poverty?
We would support a city-funded expansion of fair fares. We provided 150,000 MetroCards in phase 1 of fair fares. I believe 96,000 or a number like that has been dispersed. I think that a city-funded expansion of fair fares, Chairman, as you have described, is something that we would work with the city agencies to expand, and we commend you for that suggestion.
Okay. I also introduced a language to create legislation to create a transportation improvement district. The following idea from some professor, it will create with a small contribution, $1 from the business community in their commercial space. Every year, it will help us to raise $1 billion every year. Will you be open to, of course, I will, as you say, bring the money in because we need it. But, this is something that will require, again, public and private and academic, leadership to look at that potential idea. Will you be open to, support in different way the creation of the transportation improvement district so that money will be used for transportation?
So, Chairman, we've been very candid here today at our board meetings, at the state, Senate, and Assembly hearings, and up the street, up Broadway, about our financial condition. We're in dire financial straits, and additional revenue would be welcome at any time at the MTA, but particularly now, Chairman.
Thank you. With that,
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon. I will say that I have found this hearing, I've learned a lot already, so I appreciate you taking the time and talking to us today. And I do have some systemic questions, but I would be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity, even though I'm aware that you are all intimately aware about my concern about the impact of the proposed reduction of services to express bus service to the western part of my district. I also, although they haven't quite been as vocal, I am concerned about on the BMX4, the bypassing of the Norwood station. But to your credit, I have to say I am extremely appreciative that you've sent high-level leadership to come to the district, to listen to people, to hear their concerns, and I look forward to coming up to a solution that serves your needs as well as the needs of my constituents. I do have some questions about accessible stations. I guess if we're talking about 70 stations, it sounds like you've identified 50. It sounds like you also have a principle in terms of trying to make sure that within 2 stops there's an accessible station. But to the extent that you have discretion, how are we going to identify the remaining stations and making sure that the cities, that all communities are represented?
Okay. Well, first of all, Councilmember, thank you very much for the kind comment about Riverdale. I would stress again, the discussion's not over, although we have come up with a final plan. We did make the point, and I'll happily reiterate it in public here, that the debate is ongoing. We know you have concerns. I've got my colleagues Craig and Mark here today, and we will continue to talk with you. On the basis or the point of accessibility, just allow me to just comment on how we chose the first 50, and specifically the first 36 in order to get to no more than 2 stops away, and then I'll come on to the remaining 22. And that was very simply by applying some science behind where you need to fill in the gaps in order to achieve that no more than 2 stops away objective, but also by applying a bit of logic and applying a customer lens to look at, for example, it makes sense to be mindful of demographics. So if there's an area with a particular high senior population, if there's a hospital, we look at interchange stations, we look at stations where perhaps we've only done half of the station, so it makes sense to finish the job off. We look at stations where there's an interchange with buses. So there are a series of criteria that we apply so that ultimately we want to get every station done, but in the meantime, let's do those that add the most value. And we also obviously look at footfall as well, the numbers of people using the station both on an in and an out or an interchange perspective. So I would recommend that we adopt that same strategy, and certainly we've got an idea which the 22 should be, but we're very happy to continue that dialogue in conjunction with yourselves and the advocacy groups.
Chair, just a couple quick ones. When I ran for office, someone told me that I always had a MetroCard in my wallet just in case the media ever asked it. They've never have, but I can't say that I'm particularly knowledgeable about Omni because I guess it's limited installation so far. Could you talk about how that's going, what the impact will be, and also about in terms of integration of paying for services? That came up as a discussion regarding the buses, and I think that there is value in having an integrated pay system, including express bus service.
So I'm very excited about it. I think it's an absolute game changer for New York. I was in London when the Oyster card came into being, and that certainly transformed transit in London. In my latter days at the Toronto Transit Commission, we were rolling out a smart card there. So it's definitely the way to go. What's particularly exciting for New York is we're not just using cards, we are going straight to what's called open payment. In other words, you will be able to pay with a phone, you will be able to pay with a smart watch if you've got one of those watches that's linked to, say, an Apple payment system. You'll be able to use your credit card. We're doing it in a phased fashion. It's a very simple methodology where you tap and the fare is deducted and you're good to go. You never have to top it up. You can set your bank to auto reload. You'll still be able to use cash, but you'll be able to buy either at a machine or at a third-party vendor. We will progressively be migrating all the existing products onto the Omni system. So at the moment it's pay-as-you-go on 16 stations and on all of Staten Island buses. Progressively over the next year, every bus and every station across all 5 boroughs will be fitted with this system. It's configurable. It means that you can, for example, make it more interregional. We're already talking to the PATH people and to New Jersey Transit. So it's the way to go. It's on time and it's on budget, and it's hugely exciting.
Thank you. I have one more question, and just, I do want to echo some of the concerns raised by the speaker in terms of the city's role in leadership at the MTA. I want great mass transit for my constituents, but I do have some concerns about funding the MTA with what I feel, and I realize that this is not the decisions made by you guys, but that the role of the city in leadership of the MTA, I think, is a real concern, particularly, and I think the speaker also made the point, that not only do we pay direct transfer of resources, but congestion pricing is going to be paid by New York City residents. We pay more than our fair share, and I think that we don't have the role that we should have in terms of governance. I was a little I'm interested, people have talked about the signal modernization as sort of a panacea. I'm curious as to what the impact will be in terms of capacity. If you feel confident that you know what that impact will it be as significant as I'm under the impression it will be?
Sorry, Council Member, I think it is a panacea. I said when I got here, the most transformative thing we can do for subway service is to bite the bullet and get on with re-signaling. Let's just take the two lines that are currently under modern signaling. Those are the L line and the 7 line. And it's no secret or coincidence that those regularly achieve over 90% punctuality, whereas the other conventionally signaled lines are at a lower level. And let's take another example. On the 7, we jumped from around 25 trains per hour to 29 trains per hour. And the reason it's so transformative is twofold. Number one, you get exponentially more reliability with modern signaling because you're not reliant on so much line-side equipment, which is in itself potentially a single point of failure. Train stops, trip cocks, airlines, signal trees. There's a lot. It's a safe system, but there's a lot of mechanical equipment that has to be maintained and could go wrong. And the second reason, because the trains talk to each other, it's a train-to-train communication system with CBTC, you can run trains safely closer together. So it's way more capacity around. Typically, you'd assume around 10% more capacity. And there are lines out there around the world, and back on my old stomping ground, the Victoria line, 36 trains per hour. It's a very, very capable system. I've brought in a world-class signaling expert, Pete Tomlin. He knows what he's doing. He's done it around the world. This plan will see a CBTC rolled out across the system in an unprecedented fashion. It really is transformative, actually.
That sounds amazing. Thank you, Chair. I appreciate you letting me abuse the clock.
Councilmember Richard.
Thank you, Chair. And let me start off by thanking you all for the work that you're doing. The A train has been running better recently. We're not out of the woods yet. Before I begin, I just wanted to start off by just asking some questions around vending in the MTA system. And I just wanted to hear a little bit more about your policy around vending in our subways.
So, Council Member, the City of New York Department of Health regulates food vendors in particular. Other vendors are regulated by other parts of the city. The current City of New York Department of Health code prohibits the selling of food within 10 feet of a subway station. And inside a subway station, obviously there is some food vending by vendors that have been approved, entered into a lease with the MTA, and their food storage, preparation, et cetera, has been approved by the Department of Health. The concerns that we would have with respect to a unregulated food vendor program in the subways would include the following. First, subway stations, whether it's the stairs up and down, the mezzanine, the platforms, et cetera, have limited real estate and they're crowded places. So there's a safety issue related to crowding and having a significant number of vendors in a subway station. There are significant issues related to the preparation of food, storage, et cetera, refrigeration that I just mentioned. Third, there are questions: what happens to the food if it's not all consumed or in preparation, and vermin? And last would be a cost issue from an MTA point of view. Any proposal that's made by the city, the mayor, or the city council, we'll consider seriously, of course, but those are the issues that we would have as the operator of the subways.
And I know there's been a proposal thrown out there on dedicated space to alleviate quote-unquote congestion, although we know congestion has a lot to do with the infrequency and the trains coming on time and coming more rapidly. That's what actually adds to a lot more congestion in our subway system. But what I'm getting at is, you know, we don't want to see people criminalized over selling churros. You know, I'm confused at how that's adding to congestion. One person with a cart selling churros in our system. So I'm not saying that there should not be rules, but we should be more thoughtful in perhaps figuring out a medium with the police department to ensure that there at least is some dedicated space. And last I checked, there's also a lot of vacancies right now currently, I think, in a lot of your commercial spaces in the subway system. Am I correct?
There are vacancies, yes.
All right. And how many vacancies are there?
It's probably at this point north of 100, but we have in process more than 50 RFPs where there is actually a selection process. And I would add that a lot of those, the historic newspaper vendors, which I know you're aware are disproportionately immigrants, are trying to update their businesses to meet with the modern marketplace. So they're not just selling print media, as people use a little less print media and candy and soft drinks and so on, but we're trying to help them provide a framework where there's a little more walk-in opportunity. They can diversify what they're offering so that community can be equally successful in the MTA space.
Got that. And wouldn't it make sense to figure out a process where if there are individuals selling churros or whatever they're selling down there, is there some sort of process that the MTA has where they can alert these individuals, hey, there's an opportunity here to partner here, or if you have 100 vacancies, what does the outreach plan look like to ensure that perhaps there's opportunities for these entrepreneurs?
Absolutely. We can talk about the outreach plan. The MTA has actually done a lot more outreach on some of these retail spaces than it has in the past, and we've had, I think, some interesting successes in creating new spaces that are really going to work for our customers. So happy to talk about it.
I'm putting on my thinking cap for a second. I think one of the things we should do, rather than arresting and summoning people perhaps for the first time for an offense, is to ensure that they're getting that specific information, and perhaps the MTA should do a better job at making sure they know those opportunities are there. The second thing I just wanted to put on a record is about the more than 500 officers now being proposed for fare evasion and literally walking off the train. I saw someone getting a summons for fare evasion this morning. Wouldn't it make more sense to put some of that money into fares rather than hiring over 500 individuals because of fare evasion?
Well, Council Member, as I mentioned to the Chairman, we are fully supportive of the current fares program. We would be fully supportive, as I mentioned. We provided 150,000 MetroCards for Phase 1. An expansion of fares, we would also support and work with the city and city agencies to make it work.
Okay, but I'll just put this on a record. If we're going to spend that amount of money to enforce fare evasion, it would make more sense to put money into fares to ensure that people could actually get on the train. Last I checked, no one hopping the turnstile is a millionaire, although the NYPD claims that they find people with stacks of thousands of dollars on them when they're hopping a train. But the people I see participating in fare evasion are from communities that historically have been underfunded, that don't have the jobs. And I just wanted to make sure we put that out on the record, that that would be a wiser course. And wouldn't it make more sense to make sure that social workers are also paid for to deal with the homeless, rather than having this heavy law enforcement strategy, which has never worked in the first place? This is why we're running back into the same issues again.
So, Council Member, if I might, again, totally and enthusiastically supportive of fares and its expansion. I did just want to note the following. The 500 police officers are not being completely dedicated to fare evasion. And indeed, a portion of them will end up on the Long Island Railroad and Metro North and doing policing there. Those that are dedicated and deployed to the subways and buses will be doing what police officers do, most fundamentally providing a safe and secure environment in the subways. And fare evasion would be one of the responsibilities that group dedicated to the subway.
Right, but subway crime, I mean, obviously has its ups and downs, but does hiring, I mean, are we at that space where it warrants 500 new officers to be in our system based on the numbers? And I chair the Public Safety Committee, so I study these numbers pretty closely, and I don't think what we're seeing warrants 500 more officers in our subway system.
Well, again, council member, it may have been before you joined the meeting. I noted that there are about 80 positions that are open as a result of vacancies and attrition and unfilled positions. And the 500 will be deployed across all MTA agencies. So I think that point is worth noting.
Okay, I'm gonna just have a few questions, and then I'm gonna get off the mic. I know. Let me get two more.
Councilmember, sorry.
I know.
Councilmember, sorry.
Okay. I'll respect the chair.
Ask the next questions, and we move to the next one.
I mean, but you took a sizable amount of time, so we could, okay.
Okay. Councilmember Chacon, followed by Councilmember Levin.
Okay, thank you. Hi, gentlemen. Because I only have 3 minutes, I'm going to ask my questions, and I invite you to pick up your pens if you want to get the questions. So my first question is about privacy, and I know there's a big push to bring the Omni program in to allow for every access point of the transportation system to have a kind of technological advanced way to get onto the train. We've been having some conversations here in the City Council about smart chips, and so can you talk a little bit about the privacy, the data you're capturing, how you'll be able to protect that data? People want it, because I'm assuming that some of these things are going to be connected to our phones, to our identity, and so folks coming in and out of the subways, I think it's concerning, and we want to understand a little bit more. Second, do you have any data?
Council member, would you prefer we come back to you in writing?
Come back. Yeah, I'm going to ask all my questions, so I don't have to fight with the chair about time. Just keep talking. The second question is about Lyft and other for-hire vehicles using the spaces that the buses have to pick up riders. That's been a big issue in my district. Oftentimes, a car will wait there for a passenger, the bus honks, and people don't get out. This causes a lot of delays, not just around the bus stops, but around MTA stations as well. Talk a little bit about data and what you're doing to that effect, and whether we can partner up at the city level to essentially make that unpickable, a place for non-pickups, to kind of ban pickups. The third is the B71 is a line in Brooklyn, like many lines that have been cut and are asking for restoration. It's an interesting one because it points and connects to places like Red Hook, who are disconnected from some of the main infrastructure around trains and subways. And so if there's any update on that and how you're thinking about restorations, I know we've been in meetings together and talking a little bit about that restoration. Red Hook also presents an interesting one that connects to the ferry, but the ferry doesn't connect to the MTA. And people always ask me that question: why can't I use my MetroCard on the MTA, my MTA MetroCard on the NYC ferry? Give us a little bit of insight on that. The administration says, well, there's no communication, or well, actually, just give us fresh information about when we can use the MTA on the ferry. And then the final question is more about the work that we have to do around construction sites. So this is a kind of opportunity as you are pushing a lot of capital improvements that spills out into the streets. As a bike rider, I don't have a car, I don't drive, so I ride my bike a lot, and a lot of New Yorkers are beginning to ride, feel uncomfortable without an extended kind of bike lane that can protect people around construction sites. That's the last thing. I don't know if that's something that you can speak to as you kind of talk a lot about the capital improvements. That's going to have a big issue on the ground. And we passed some local laws recently to mitigate some of that. And where does the MTA fall on those things? Okay, thank you. We can start wherever. I'm done with my questions.
Councilmember, let me have a go at these.
Yeah.
I was just checking the etiquette.
I think those are 4 questions. Go ahead.
Yeah, okay, so you use the time to ask your questions, that's fine. Okay, so let's kick off with, I'll do them in the order that you came up with. Janno in particular may want to comment on number 4, but let me give these a go. Privacy concerns around Omni. We're very mindful of those, and we're taking this very seriously. So the data is anonymized. It's what's called anonymized aggregated data. data. So we can use it for planning purposes, and that is very useful in that regard, because you can look at the number of taps on and the number of taps off at a particular station or on a bus route, which is invaluable for making informed decisions about where to add service, for example. But it's absolutely secure. So it's encrypted end to end, so that transactions and account information is kept secure. So we will comply. We do comply, given that Omni's already up and running in certain locations, with the same banking and credit card industry security requirements that other large retailers have to adhere to. So we don't track individual people, we don't sell customer data, and we never will. So there's a huge amount of focus put onto people's anonymized data, but where the data is useful on an anonymized basis, we will use it for that. In terms of Lyft, and other vehicles for that matter using bus spaces, quite simply, they shouldn't be. And this is a problem, and I have seen it myself, and I've seen, in some cases, other vehicles parked up where they shouldn't be. So please do, let's have a separate conversation about any specific areas that have given you concern recently, but we are aware of the particular trouble spots around the system. We do regularly ask people to move on. They're not supposed to be sitting there. The bus stop's there for a reason. I think it's selfish to park up in a space like that, because you're precluding a vehicle that can carry 50 people, 60 people from being able to stop. So we'll keep on that, and if there's somewhere in particular that you have a concern about, give me a call, or I'll drop you an email later. In terms of the B71, I'd say that in conjunction also with all the other routes, we do have them very much under review right now. All of the routes in Brooklyn are under review because we've just, as you know, engaged upon the latest of the borough redesigns. So, and B71 we know is of concern to you, and we are having a look at that and all of the other routes to make sure that we've got them right. Obviously, there's a balance between what we can do across the whole city. But I was down in Red Hook just the other day, actually, and took the ferry there, you'll be pleased to know. So I know the area, and I know how important that is to that location. In terms of the ferry and migrating it onto Omni, we'd love to see that happen. As you know, at the moment, the ferry's the same price as the subway, $2.75, which I think is great. So it wouldn't be too difficult at all to migrate the ferry system onto Omni. That's something that we're actively wanting to talk to the city about. To me, it would be crazy to not have the two systems fully integrated. And lastly, with regard to construction sites, I mean, it's something that we'd need the cooperation of DOT on if we were to, for example, install a temporary bus lane around a construction site. But as a general point, we're very mindful of safety implications around work sites. Obviously, the work site itself has to be protected, but equally, we want to make sure that people migrating around it are protected if it warrants a bike lane or if it warrants some other kind of protection with jersey fencing or whatever. That's something that we actively discuss with DOT to make sure that we keep people safe, but we don't inadvertently create another problem. So again, if you have any particular sites you're thinking of which prompted the question, give me a call. I'll happily look into them for you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Levin.
Thank you, Chair. So my first question has to do with the 500 police officers. What went into making this decision? Was there a study that showed that there was a shortage of NYPD transit police, or did you hear from NYPD that there's a shortage of transit police, that they needed supplemented by MTA police?
So, Council Member, the MTA police obviously does its own analysis of its needs. They started with the fact, as I mentioned, that there are 80 vacancies, attrition, unfilled positions that needed to be filled. Mm-hmm. They, like the NYPD, which is a much larger force, have data that suggests once a police officer reaches 20 years of seniority and he or she vests in the pension, there's an X% likelihood that within 12 or 15 months they'll retire. So it's things like that, point one. Point two, we look not only at New York City Transit.
I know about the greater MTA, I get it.
Of course.
Okay, so how much is it going to cost a year?
$50 million.
$50 million a year, okay.
Less a contribution by the Manhattan DA's office for a portion of it.
Got it. Okay. When an incident occurs and one of these MTA officers arrives and NYPD Transit arrives at the exact same time, who has jurisdiction over that incident? Who has rank?
Well, look, the NYPD has primary responsibility for policing the subways. There is a high level of cooperation between the MTA police, NYPD, Nassau County, Suffolk County, Westchester, et cetera.
I get it.
And it may depend in a certain case as to who got on the scene first, who may have seen the crime or incident, et cetera.
But there has to be an on-scene, especially in critical moments, there has to be a chain of command. Where's chain of command in between NYPD and MTA police?
Again, there's a high level of cooperation and collaboration between NYPD, MTA police, Nassau, Suffolk, Westchester, et cetera. They know each other at the patrol level. They know each other at the leadership level. There are protocols in place.
Okay. And was NYPD asked whether they wanted this?
There were discussions between the MTA police and NYPD. Yes.
And they said yes, they wanted it.
I can't say that. I wasn't party to those discussions.
In particular around homelessness, what I am very concerned about is between this initiative and the New York City's Outreach NYC initiative, there is, as we're seeing in real time, an increase in policing the homeless in the subways. That we're seeing, I'm seeing cell phone video after cell phone video of these incidents taking place. Anecdotally, it seems like it's more than it was last year. The problem is that we do not actually have resources to offer people that are sleeping on the subway. So we have the shelter system, but it's not just people that are service resistant. The shelter system is an unappealing avenue for a lot of people that are sleeping on the street and sleeping on the subway. That's the basic intake center at 30th Street for men, Franklin Avenue for women, or the big assessment centers. There are safe havens, but there's a waiting list for safe havens. We don't have enough safe havens. We haven't invested enough in safe havens. And so if you talk to people, if you actually talk to people that are sleeping on the subway and ask them, would you be willing to go into a safe haven, 8 out of 10 people would say yes. If you ask them whether they'll be willing to go into 30th Street or Franklin Avenue, 8 out of 10 people would say no. And so when we're policing them without actually giving them the resources that they need or want or will use, it is a recipe for bad outcomes. Bad outcomes meaning arrests, people getting handcuffed in the middle of a subway station, getting caught on video, going viral, everybody saying this is a terrible idea. I don't see this policy working, either policy, the city's policy or your policy, if we do not have actual resources to give people to get off of the subway or off of the street. And so if we're investing $50 million a year in 500 new police officers that I don't think the NYPD actually asked for, and it's a murky jurisdiction, that money could be very well used for new safe havens or better outreach or social workers or people like the incident that happened just on Friday in Jamaica, that there should be somebody that's a high-level social worker that goes out for people that are extremely service resistant, psychotic, or has a psychosis, or so that is, but that's not what is happening. And if we're just sending a police officer, an NYPD or an MTA police officer, to go out and interact with somebody with a psychosis, then that is a recipe for a bad outcome. So
council member, let me start, and then I'll turn it over to my colleague Andy Byford. So a couple of things. The incident that you referred to, I think, is the one where the head of the Health and Hospitals Corporation was in the subway station. and he, without identifying the name of the patient or client, suggested that the approach had been exactly right in that case. Point one. Point two, I will note that there was an agreement reached and a press release done among the city, the MTA, DA Vance, the NYPD with respect to, and the MTA, of course, with respect to these quality of life issues. Point three is, as I understand it, and I don't claim to be an expert on these issues, but the City of New York has got a statutory obligation to provide resources, including safe havens and shelters.
We have a right to shelter in New York City. That doesn't mean that they have a right to a safe haven. We have a right to shelter.
As I understand it, right, there's a statutory obligation imposed by the state on municipalities around the state of New York with respect to...
Case law that requires right to shelter.
Right. And then up...
Councilmember, I thought your question was very thoughtful, actually, and resonated a lot with me. This is a really tough challenge, because on the one hand, and this is the dilemma I face as the person you rightly hold accountable for providing clean, safe, reliable, on-time performance, right? I'm on the subway every day. And on the one hand, you're trying to be humane and Christian to people who are really vulnerable, who haven't chosen this way of life probably. A lot of them have psychological challenges and have got real issues and need help. Certainly don't need to be arrested. And I've spoken to people, to homeless people, and asked them about, that there are alternatives. Would you consider going for services? I spent a whole night at Parsons Archer one night, and I was talking to homeless people, and I was interacting with the BRC, the Bowery Residents Committee, and I was doing that for my own education to just ask people, why wouldn't you go to the shelters? And I remember one guy said to me, it was quite striking. He said, "Sir, have you ever been to one of the shelters? It's actually really quite scary
and dangerous." More dangerous than the subway.
Absolutely. You're not in an individual room. You're in a big dormitory. I invite you to try to go to sleep. There's people prowling around. So where people sometimes say it's an MTA issue, I actually don't agree. I think it's a societal challenge, and it's only as a society that we will properly crack this by the state, the city, and other participants. We're not passive to this. The MTA, the NYPD, the Bowery Residents Committee, the social services, we've all got to work together to come up with to address the root cause and to provide viable solutions, because it's very hard to, with humanity, kick someone out knowing that the alternative is pretty unpalatable. But the reason I said it's a dilemma for me is because equally I can't just ignore a mess all over a train. The E-train, I ride it regularly. It's like a traveling hostel. In some cases, you can't get into cars because everyone's stretched out on the seats, or there's or it's very difficult for my cleaners to be able to deal with those issues. So we've got to get that balance right. I understand your link with the police. I certainly don't want people to be arrested. What we're trying to do, though, is encourage people to go to alternatives. We need to fund those alternatives so that we can, with good conscience, say, things have moved on. Lying down in the subway is no longer an option, and there is a viable alternative. That's the challenge. If in the short term we just keep asking or keep throwing people out, they'll just keep coming back in. That's a simplistic response or a simplistic challenge to the MTA to just deal with it. It needs to be a far more intelligent, comprehensive solution than that.
Right. I think we actually know what the solutions are. There's safe havens, drop-in centers, supportive housing. Those are and more social workers to do outreach. Those are things that we could do today that would have a serious impact. But handcuffing people and bringing them into a station house and forcing them, saying they're going to get a ticket, they're going to get arrested if they don't go to BRC is not going to ameliorate the issue. So, thank you.
Councilmember Ross.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon. Chair Foye, in your remarks, you talked about expanding the popular e-hail pilot program, doubling access from 1,200 to 2,400 customers. I think that's laudable, but you didn't mention the changes in that service that will be provided. Right now, the users of this service, this pilot program, have unlimited access to the program, unlimited rides, and they pay $275 for the ride, regardless of how far or how long the ride takes. The changes, the proposed changes, as stated in a letter from you and an article in the Daily News, will now limit them to 16 trips a month, and they will have to incur the charges or the cost of anything above $15. Greatly diminishing their ability to use this service, changing it drastically while adding the number of participants. You are actually cutting the accessibility of people who are currently in this program, making, this not a win-win for anyone. Can you explain the rationale for these changes?
Yes, Council Member. In doubling the number of participants, and I will have to say that the eHail On Demand program has been widely applauded. We looked at what other municipalities around the country are doing, Boston, Washington, D.C., Chicago, et cetera, and there's no place in America where the eHail On Demand program exists without such caps and limits. And what we did in doubling it was to put ourselves in a situation where we can get richer, more reliable data to help determine the future of the program, but also put caps on that are consistent with what other large cities around the United States have done with their eHail On Demand program, and to create a situation in which further growth in the program, which is not assured, but would be done on a financially sustainable basis. And that's the reason for that change.
But now you are going to limit the number of rides. You have participants who utilize this service to go to work. 16 trips a month will now then render them unable to do that. And you are then limiting access as opposed to increasing it.
Council Member, respectfully, no. The eHail On Demand program is but one option. Our paratransit customers will still have the ability to use broker services or the accessible AAR vans. So the eHail On Demand program will never be the only service, the only mode of service available to our paratransit customers.
I understand that, and I respectfully have to disagree in terms of how wonderful the other AAR program is, Accessoride. And that's pretty much why many of the people have opted into the eHail program, because the paratransit Accessoride, the traditional one, is not reliable. And your own data will show that there's a lot of dissatisfaction with it. It's not reliable. So that really isn't an acceptable option to say that they will have 16 rides and then they'll have to rely on the very service that made them opt to take the eHail services.
Councilmember, may I have a go, please? Effectively, there's three types of service. There's eHail On Demand, which is the one about which you're asking, and that is designed to give the participants the spontaneity of choice that you and I both enjoy. And I think that's fantastic. You know, if you suddenly decide you want to go somewhere, short notice, you can get your e-hail on demand and off you go. Or if you have some sort of crisis, your pet's ill or a family relative is ill, off you go. That's great. It's not meant to be to go to work, because for that, you've got the other two choices, which are the blue and white vans of Accessoride, and I take your point, although I'll come back to that, or the third element, which is the enhanced broker service that we're increasingly rolling out. Enhanced broker being you can book it for a defined time the day before. It's a taxi. It's not a blue and white van, not one of the big vans that accommodate several wheelchairs. It's a taxi service. And we've been working very hard with a number of providers, including Curb, to make that service better, along with, I said I'll come back to it, the blue and white vans, which we absolutely accept aren't perfect yet, but we have been changing the no-show and the late policy. We've increased visibility of where your vehicle is by dashboards, but also using phones and apps that you can see where your ride is. We've been doing a lot of work with vehicle owners and training the actual operators to be more customer-focused, more customer-friendly. We have deployed a new scheduled and dispatch system. We've been progressively renewing the fleet. We've got around 700 new vehicles at the moment. So back to e-hail on demand. What we're trying to do is keep it going, because there was a lot of rumors wafting around we were going to kill it, and people kept saying to us, "But hang on a minute, it's the cost per ride is less," and that's true. It is.
It is.
It is. But the volume has way outgrown that, because it's so popular, and because the participants, the 1,200 initial participants, are using way more rides than we thought they would, and that's their prerogative, don't get me wrong. I can be spontaneous, so can you, why shouldn't they? But in the short term, it's becoming unsustainable and unaffordable. So what we chose to do instead is, rather than say at the end of the year we can't afford it anymore, we've expanded it to 2,400 people, so we've doubled the size of it, but we have put some caps on. What we have also said, though, is if with a wider number of, an expanded number of participants, if we find that the first 1,200 weren't reflective of the norm, and maybe for whatever reason just used it some more, and if over time we can relax the constraints, in other words, increase the subsidy and increase the number of rides, then we will do that. This is about trying to keep a very popular service going.
Mr. Byford, but a subsidized ride on traditional AAR or paratransit is about $81. And right now, you're talking about limiting the e-hail to $15, right, per ride, which is a drastic difference between the subsidy that you pay now, and you're able to maintain that at $275. You're maintaining that at $275. A trip, when you get in a taxi, the surcharge start at like $6. So you're vastly limiting, their ability and their their ability to get around. $15, I think, is not a reasonable cap if you're talking about financially, when another subsidized ride is, at least the cap is like it costs $81. We're subsidizing. And I think that inequity flies in the face again of people who have different abilities. So I would like you and Chair Foye, I'd like you to go back and look at this, because we are again creating a disparity among, a part of our population that really doesn't have a whole lot of options. And I just want to ask, I'm finished, I know, Chair, I know my time, but I just want to ask, there are 2 vacancies on the MTA board. Is there any talk or consideration of making one of those positions available to a person with other needs, a person who's from the disabilities community that can, bring these very disparities, quite glaring to me, to the board, so that they have voice and it isn't secondary, or it has to come from, city council. Thank you.
Council member, I believe the two vacancies you're referring to are two vacancies of City of New York nominees. We would welcome a ADA colleague on the board, just as Andy has hired a special accessibility advisor, and as I intend to do so as well.
Okay, I think it should be a requirement. Even if it's above whatever your number is, there should be a person from that particular community. Thank you. Thank you.
If there's anyone here that is sitting in the public to participate in the governmental operation hearing, you can go to 250 Broadway. That hearing had been moved to 250 Broadway, 14th floor. Again, if anyone from the public here is sitting to participate in the public and operation hearing, that hearing has been moved to 250 Broadway, 14th floor. We will get a chance to the council member to ask one question each, and then we will get into the public. Councilmember Richard.
Okay, just last points, and I just wanted to second what Councilmember Levin said. I hope that there's really some boundaries established when it comes to who's in charge on the scene. We saw this play out in our general welfare offices across the city with the NYPD and private security, and there was some circumstances that were really bad during those occasions. So I'm really hoping that there's a clear standard of boundaries and that training kicks in.
Sorry,
and let me just get through, because I know our chairman is going to kick me off the mic. He's not going to be as generous as he was to Debbie Rose.
I'm sorry, Councilmember.
So I'm just going to get to my question now. I'm going to get to my question now. I'm going to get to my question. I know. I'm going to get... Are you going to give me the time? Okay, thank you. I would give Debbie more time than me, too.
Give me 1 second, please.
All right, okay.
So we just want to be respectful to the public.
Yep, got it.
I haven't finished.
Got it.
So we have the timing for the council member.
Got it.
And you use double the time. Now give me the chance for you to ask another question.
Okay, got it. So this question is related. You spoke of investments into different stations, and I would suggest really looking at Supton Boulevard Station, which is where the air train is connected, where you have 200 tourists or people coming to New York City lined up who don't even know how to use the Metro card machines, which really backs up the station there. So I just wanted to hear what's your plan for that. Councilmember Miller could not be here today, but he wanted me to raise the question around the Jamaica bus depot and where we are at with that. And then the last thing I'll ask about is where you at in terms of the bus network on automated bus lane enforcement on ABLE. So if you could just answer those three questions. Where you at on Supton Boulevard? I hope there's some real investment going. It's shameful that that is the gateway into Queens and the gateway into New York City, and the station looks the way it is. There are no helpers to assist individuals who don't know how to use those Metro card machines. The Jamaica depot, and then obviously the Queens bus network system is being redone, but where are we at with ABLE as well?
Okay. Thank you, Councilmember, for those questions. Supton Boulevard, yeah, know it well, been there many a time, and it certainly is in need of some investment, some TLC, and that certainly will be one of the stations that we will be addressing via the capital plan in terms of upgrading all of the stations. So there's a lot of component work needs to be done, but and obviously accessibility work, but also aesthetics. That station certainly is not looking as good as it once did. I can say, though, that we will be putting in Omni soon at Supton Boulevard, so that will help
Putting up what?
Omni, the Omni system, the smart card system, because to your point about having a lot of tourists arrive, obviously people off the plane and particularly people coming with chip-enabled cards with the little Wi-Fi symbol on, it will be immensely value for them to be able to purchase an Omni card. So we're deliberately bringing forward Supton Boulevard as one of those stations.
But I would also, sorry not to just cut you off, I would really suggest you having some individuals. I know you have this program that was spoken about where you take the clerks out of the booth to do some work. There certainly needs to be that there.
Okay, so what I'll do, council member, is I will speak to the local group station manager about the staffing level there and what we might be able to do to help tourists, because certainly, you know, it's never pleasant to turn up somewhere and not be able to figure anything out. So I'll talk to the group station manager. With regard to ABLE, the ABLE system, it stands for Automatic Bus Lane Enforcement. We're very excited about that. We have launched that on the M15 route. We're about to launch it on the M14 route. What that does is using cameras, both static DOT cameras on a bus lane equipped route and also bus-mounted cameras, you can enforce bus lane compliance, because the system will capture any car that is illegally parked up in a bus lane over a certain threshold, that threshold being 5 minutes. If a car is caught by more than two buses or more, parked in a bus lane for more than 5 minutes, a warning is automatically generated, I say a warning, a fine. That starts at $50, and it's on a graduated basis. You can't keep parking in the bus lane, or if you do, your fine will get bigger and bigger. Again, the intention here isn't fines. I'm not interested in the fines. I'm interested in giving our buses a fighting chance of getting through the traffic. The bus lanes are there for a reason. And again, to my earlier point, it's also selfish to park up in bus lanes. So we would like to see the ABLE system rolled out across the whole city. We're very interested, and we're already talking to DOT about this. We would like to see more bus lanes, better enforced bus lanes, widespread use of the ABLE system. I think the busway on 14th Street is superb. It was great to have Speaker Johnson's support for that, and I'd love to see that copied or installed on other cross streets as well across the whole city. And in terms of Jamaica Depot, we have done we're doing the environmental assessment. The environmental assessment has been submitted. There is an issue that I know the council member will be interested in terms of the uncovered parking space. That's what we've assumed for now. I know he has a concern with that. He would like to see a different design. That is still an option. The reason that we have submitted it with the uncovered solution is purely to keep this thing moving along. That depot desperately needs to be rebuilt, and that will happen in this capital plan.
He wanted me to emphasize it needed to be covered.
We're aware of that. So to set his mind at rest, us submitting with it showing as uncovered doesn't preclude that change from being made. It was purely to move the process along. We need to rebuild that depot, and it's in this plan.
Councilmember, I just wanted to add one thing. The point you made about the relationship between the NYPD and the MTA police force. There is a high level of day-to-day and leadership coordination, cooperation between the two police forces. The police forces in this city, NYPD, MTA, Port Authority Police, and federal forces regularly do drills, tabletops, full-scale exercises, field exercises, et cetera. And at the leadership level and at the patrol officer on a subway platform, et cetera, there's a high level of cooperation, including, for instance, sharing the color of the day with respect to undercover officers to avoid blue-on-blue situations, et cetera. And I just wanted to assure you of that. That is also the case with the MTA police and Nassau County Police, Suffolk County Police, Westchester, and every other police force in the MTA area. Thank you.
Councilman Lieber.
Thank you very much, Chair. Two quick comments and a question. First, I want to associate myself with the questions and remarks of Councilmember Rose regarding the Accessoride, and in particular having a seat on the MTA board for somebody from the disability community. I think that would be very helpful to the MTA. Second comment, as I mentioned to you, President Byford, a couple of weeks ago, I've been taking the 7 train every morning and every evening, and the signal work that was done there has been very effective. I rarely wait more than 1 or 2 minutes in the morning to catch a 7 train. This morning it was 1 minute. I think the Friday morning it was 1 minute. So it's very effective. The more that we can be investing across the city on all lines and signal upgrades, I think would be to the great benefit of New Yorkers. I think that the public would respond to that. I mean, that's the kind of thing that people really want. People really want a train that's going to show up quickly, get them where they need to go, cut down on their commute time, make for a better system. So there's that. I don't know if this was brought up before, but the methodology that you all have used on estimating the amount of revenue lost through fare evasion, I know there's some question about how that methodology came about, and just on its face, it seems odd to me. So you think it's about $250 million a year? Is that right? How many users are there? How many subway riders are there?
Okay, so the subway ridership's around 5.6 million.
Okay, so and so I think that comes to something around 10 fare evasions per customer per year. Is that right?
But I think the
I mean, if you were to break it down like that, that's what it would be.
The figure I look at is the annual loss. So not just on subway, but subways and buses is between $260 to $300 million a year. That buys you a lot of service.
Okay, but are there other systems that throughout the world that have a much lower per capita rate or per rider rate of losses?
We do comparisons on a percentage basis of, let's take, for example, bus fare evasion. And on some lines, it's as high as 25%. That is way higher than anywhere else I've ever worked. I mean, typically, you'd be aiming, I can't think of many systems that have zero fare evasion. Typically, if you can contain it within the around 3%, 4%, that's kind of the cost of doing business.
Right.
But to have some lines or routes where you're way north of that is just bleeding the system of money that it desperately needs.
Okay, and then just really quickly on the subways, our turnstiles can be jumped, as we've seen with the protests over the last couple of weeks. Other cities, other systems have turnstiles that are harder to jump. So DC or Paris, right, have different, harder to. Our turnstiles, I mean, I guess they're part of the identity of New York. They've probably been that way for several generations now. But like, have we looked at replacing them with harder to jump turnstiles?
I'm not ruling anything out. I think we should look at what other systems do. What I'm familiar with is paddles, where you either insert your ticket back in the day or even a token, or increasingly you tap on a reader and the paddles open, and there's a magic eye, as they call it, or like a magnetic eye, magnetic magic eye, but a beam, so that only one person can go through and the gates then shut again very quickly. I've seen the reverse, actually, in Japan. I remember going to a station where it was the reverse. The default was that the gates stay open, and as long as you've paid and you pass through. So it's a very quick system, but incredibly quickly, if someone does try to sneak through without paying or they don't pay the right amount, the gates shut. So the default is the reverse. It's the gates are normally open rather than closed. I've seen full height gates. I've seen low height gates. I think job one is to get the Omni system in. It would be hugely expensive to replace all of the gates across the whole system.
Right,
but I think it is good to look at best practice. So that's something that we are actively talking about, particularly for the Achilles heel, as I described it earlier, namely the secondary gate, which is the biggest problem.
Because, and just to bring it back to my first line of question, the last thing we want to do is create interactions with the police, the jail system, the court system. The very last thing we want to do is have fare evasion result in an arrest. So anything that can be done to avoid that from happening, that is absolutely the worst case scenario.
So I agree, and you'll notice the
worse than just letting them go.
The campaign that we're running is encouraging, urging people to either pay the fare, and if you can't afford the fare, not paying isn't the right answer. Going with fair fares, applying for fares if you're eligible, that is the right solution. But just not paying is unsustainable.
I understand. I'm just saying, in the effort to get people to pay the fare, interactions with the police and cuffing and arresting and all of the above, all of that is a very, it creates so many unintended consequences. It undermines the public's confidence in the system. I understand that fare evasion is, you see it as an issue. I don't know if it really is as big an issue as we're making it out to be, but other ways of addressing it rather than police interaction, I think it is so important because it will undermine other good work that you're doing.
Okay, but can I make just one more comment, Councilmember? So I don't disagree. I don't want to see people arrested. You know, I see it happening, and I say to people, "Sir, you need to go back and buy a ticket." The $300 million, though, that is walking out the door or walking in the door, depending which way you look at it, that $300 million, to go back to where you started, that would pay for re-signaling of a line. Not the power upgrades and the new trains, but the actual cost of software for the type of service from which you now benefit. In other words, CBTC on a line with automatic train operation, which is what gives you that relentless service. That's the kind of figure we're talking about.
I get it. I'm just saying that there are people maybe other than you that are putting a priority on enforcement of quote-unquote quality of life issues, and this is one of them, and it serves, I'm just telling you what I'm seeing out there in the city, is that it is serving to undermine other good work that you're doing. So I'll leave it at that.
Understood, and I will continue to push the NYPD to adopt a very sensible approach to this. I really respect them. I think they do a great job, but we continue to push. This is about deterrence, not about arrests. The arrests are actually down at the moment in terms of
well, there's arrests maybe, but there's cuffing and ticketing, which is different. So we'll talk more offline.
Thank you. I feel that with that, and of course, first of all, like we are getting close to, having you and be appreciative of your time. The message is, we have seen the movies before, and we have lived the years of the 80s and the 90s, and the beginning of 2000, where someone with the city put the men and women, the NYPD, in a situation that it was difficult for them, and it was difficult for others individuals that also suffer the sexy use of force. We've been there. And we've been there in a city where we have arrogant individual leading institution that they thought that they were above on everything, and here we are, in a city where we have, if there's one thing that defines New Yorkers, is a lot of compassion. And I feel that we never thought on a lot of things that we've been able to accomplish today. Things that we were told 10 years ago that we couldn't do it. Things that were say, close Rikers Island, the city said, no, we cannot do it. Things that we saw, UPK, all the things, criminal justice reform, we should, legalize marijuana. People say we cannot do it, but we say it was legal for the rich. The only thing that we tried to do was not to be used to criminalize the Black and Latino and poor individual. And it took a lot of years, a lot of time, and a lot of advocate groups to say there's something wrong there. And as you know, like when it was time, where even across this building, the position was that the city should not contribute more to the MTA. We, the council, led the fight, saying we should get the $500 million. And at the end, we persuade the mayor too, because we know that you have a good plan. So here, what we are saying is, the men and women that we send to, enforce or follow direction, it's like, you have a great governmental relation team here. But for many years, the order that they got was MTA doesn't participate in community meeting. Doesn't question the great, commitment, the great Marino here, but there was direction from the top. So yeah, the concern that we have is that, which is real, the city is part of the movement, nation movement. And people say, yes, be careful criminalizing people. If you ask me today, and I know that that's a feeling for a lot of people, is that fare evasion should be resolved by providing free transportation. Because those individuals who cannot pay the fare are not the middle, the upper class. Are those individuals struggling? Are those individuals fighting addiction? Are those individuals like myself? In the 80s, I walked from 124 Sherman Avenue in Inwood to City College, not because I thought walking was hefty, but because I didn't have my 75 cents to pay my fare. So those individuals, young people who trying to get a job and they don't get a job, those who live, those 40% of New Yorkers live on poverty. So, of course, like, you have to be responsible for what we ask you to do. You need to run the largest transportation system in the nation. And everyone wants to feel safe. It doesn't matter that station is in any community. We want to be safe. So it's a challenge. It's like, something that we need to get a balance. Because in one direction, yes, I don't want to walk. If you walk through Sun Station, I have seen it. You stop there without media. You got to see how family will not let the teenager to walk through their station where there's still, violence, when there's things about lack of maintenance in the station. So, and we want for you to fix it. At the same time, we're saying, just be careful on how we address the level of crimes that we have in a station. And that's, for me, our challenge. For me, it's about, I hope again, and this also comes from Steve and I in the speaking order, we've been working hard, and I can say we led the movement together with the advocate group to establish the fair fare. Now we need to do our part, also to look and see if we can provide free transportation to those individuals that they don't have the money, and they are the numbers of those who evade the fare. So that's one area where I hope we can work. The second thing is, do the best we can to have people who are real. I know that my brother used to be a police officer in the 42nd, so all my respect to the men and women in the blue. But I also know, again, that if there's a situation of someone who is dealing with severe mental health issue, and that person is in a situation in a station, if a unit that has not been trained on how to respond and interact are not the first responding, it can create a situation where even though the level of training that the police officer can have, probably he or she cannot handle that situation. And that's what we like to prevent. We don't want to be in a press conference, because someone was killed or someone was abused by the force of someone on the men and women. We want to be sure that we support you, but from our end, we're having a lot of concern about what is the interaction between those individuals. Why we don't think about bringing back some of the staff in the station from the MTA so that we add more besides those individuals that we have. But we lost a lot because we cut a lot. We closed a lot of talking booths 15 years ago. And with that process, we also lost a lot of physical presence of the MTA in some stations. So, I hope again that we can look at that situation. I don't think it's an easy one. It's not a black and white situation. Minor crimes in the train station are real. The presence of people who doesn't have a place where to live in the station is real. How do we handle it? That's key. And I signed together with my colleague here. We don't want to be in a situation where, an abuse of power or using those situations to send someone to the prison is the solution to the numbers of people that can commit any minor crimes. But again, I hope again that we can partner advocating to provide free transportation. When we supported the congestion price, we also ask that some of those monies should be used. We know the $1 billion for the big plan of the MTA, but also we look about the possibility on how some of those money could be used for other matter important of transportation. So I don't want to put you in the spot to say, oh, can you agree with us that we can use some of those money to provide free transportation? But at least I would like to put it in your thought that when you think about here the city can provide the funding, that also the MTA should be created on how we can advocate together to provide free transportation to those individuals.
So, Chairman, you understand, of course, that the congestion, the central business district tolling, and the other revenue sources by law can only be used for capital. But as I said before, we fully support Phase 1 of Fair Fares and its expansion on a city-funded basis. We provided 150,000 MetroCards, as I mentioned, and we look forward to supporting the program as it expands. And thank you for your leadership on that.
So with that, we close in saying that from our end, from our part, what we want the MTA is to prioritize this $54 billion on riders, maintenance, repairs, workers. We would like the MTA also to understand that we, the city, are the one allocating most of the funding. We cannot go back to say the state being allocated more than the city, because a lot of people in the business sector, they don't even know how many council members we are. What they know is that we have a transportation system that is important for them to be established in New York City, so that the MTA is critical, not only for the city, state economy. So we would like to see again how we can go through this process together, committed to make our transportation system, you know, the best one in the whole world. And we trust your leadership, but there's a lot more that we need to do. With that, thank you. Thank you. Now we're going to be calling the members of the public, and we're going to be putting the clock on 2 minutes each.
Colin Wright, Danny Pearlston, Rachel Foss, Liam Blank,
So now we're getting into the members of the public. We have a representative of the MTA who is here again listening to the presentation of the public. As usually, if you feel that it would take more than 2 minutes, you summarize, but this is your time.
Good afternoon, Chair. My name is Danny Pearlstein. I am the Policy and Communications Director at the Riders Alliance. We are New York's grassroots organization of subway and bus riders. It's been a very big year for riders. This spring, we won congestion pricing. This fall, we won the largest ever MTA capital plan. Now the question is, when will the subway be fixed? Riders' #1 priorities in the next MTA capital plan are the new signals, subway cars, and elevators that will finally deliver a modern, reliable, and accessible subway system for New York, and they cannot come soon enough. So we urge your support for those. We urge your asking the tough questions. We appreciate you asking the tough questions and holding the MTA accountable for doing this work and for getting the job done. You know, 8.5 million daily riders in the MTA system depend on effective oversight and advocacy for riders, so we really appreciate this role. We also appreciate your role as the city as a funder of the MTA. While the governor controls the MTA, we recognize the unique role the city plays in the process, and we favor direct upfront investment in the MTA and its capital plan over additional debt that, as we heard from the MTA earlier, is the driver of, as they described, their dire financial situation. We are, as rider advocates, we're of course incredibly worried about that. We're enthusiastic about all of the council's questions about the 500 new police officers, which we believe are a real hindrance to the MTA's budget and their ability to provide adequate service levels. Ultimately, we'd like to see the governor shift course from hiring those police and devote that money to the MTA's core infrastructure and core service provision on subways and buses. New Yorkers are utterly dependent on our subways and buses. They are the engines of opportunity. They provide the access we need to our city. So we thank you so much.
Good morning, Chair. I'm Colin Wright, Senior Associate at Transit Center. Transit Center is a national foundation that works to improve U.S. cities through improved public transportation. We applaud the vision for the region's transit system in the MTA's proposed capital program, in particular the investments in accessible stations and new subway cars and modern signals. We think this all promises a much more reliable and accessible transit service. But the sheer ambition of this plan also raises questions about how the MTA will complete it. The issue I'd like to focus on is the MTA's high cost of construction, how it impedes progress, and how you can use your oversight role to remedy it. The cost estimates for major projects in this capital program are significantly higher than what peer transit agencies pay for similar work. For example, the MTA estimates that accessible stations will cost roughly $80 million on average. This is much higher than London's average of $22 million for recent accessibility projects under similar conditions as New York, including high real estate values, narrow stations, and complex tangle of underground utilities. Closer to home, SEPTA in Philadelphia recently brought an underground subway station on the Market Frankfurt line into ADA compliance for $9 million, including the installation of 2 elevators, structural and concrete repairs, and a new staircase. Likewise, MTA projects projects that a track mile of modern signaling will cost orders of magnitude more than Boston, London, and Paris. Given the practical limits of the authority's spending, there's no path to a consistently excellent rider experience without reducing the projected costs in this capital program. If the MTA brings its cost in line with peer agencies, the authority can stretch funds for maintenance and improvement farther and keep its debt in check, which is very important. Under Janno Lieber, the MTA has identified a number of project management and procurement reforms to increase efficiency and to make bidding for contracts more competitive, and we commend these steps and we believe they have the potential to bring down costs. But so far, however, the MTA is yet to demonstrate that it expects to bring costs down. In fact, despite project management reforms intended to accelerate work and reduce costs, estimates in this capital program do not reflect lower unit costs than previous capital programs. To set goals for cost control, I'll wrap it up. We recommend that the MTA review the transit capital costs from other cities with old rail networks and use industry averages as benchmarks to assess its own cost reduction. We want them to make these costs highly visible to the public to strengthen its case for continued work. And there are many factors that contribute to high construction costs, and there really are no silver bullets that will solve this problem overnight. But we do look forward to working with the City Council to seek clear explanations from MTA leadership about the root causes of high costs, and to continue working with you to make sure that the MTA reduces its costs so all New Yorkers can benefit from a strong, accessible transit system. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Rachel Foss, and I'm the Senior Research Analyst for reInvent Albany. We advocate for more transparent and accountable state government, including for state authorities like the MTA. We thank the Council for holding this oversight hearing. It's a critical time at the MTA, which is in the throes of a massive reorganization ordered by the Governor, which will be undertaken as the MTA takes on the biggest capital plan in its history. The Council has an important ongoing role to play to ensure the city's voice is heard and that the capital plan directly benefits subway and bus service. For instance, the Council should be actively pressing for the Mayor, Governor, and State Senate to fill the city's soon-to-be 2 empty seats on the MTA board as soon as possible. The Council should also be intensely focused on ensuring the city gets its fair share of capital spending and that city projects essential for restoring good service are given priority. As representatives of the city's subway, bus, and rail riding public, you should expect the MTA to be able to answer basic questions about what projects come first and how it knows how much spending is needed for items such as subway signals, tracks, cars, and new buses. Specifically, you should expect the MTA to, first, publicly release its 20-year needs assessment and federal transit asset management plan. That they haven't been released yet raises the question of, without these, how much did the MTA determine how much restoring the system to a state of good repair would cost? If not the needs assessment, show us what was used. 2, released a schedule of start and completion dates for major components of the 2020-24 capital plan and eventually for all projects. 3, show how much it realistically can spend per year, given that it only spent $6.6 billion on capital projects in 2018, the most per year to date. 4th, revamp its current capital program dashboard and ensure that it always commits to comparing original to current costs instead of rebaselining from amended plans. 5th, release a detailed debt plan showing how it will pay for the $10 billion in additional borrowing without increasing its operating deficit. We also ask that the council call for an independent debt affordability study to determine where the red line is with debt payments. This could be done by the city or state comptroller. I'll wrap up, of course. $6 billion in state and city funding should not be contingent upon exhaustion of the MTA's resources. And lastly, the cost to the operating budget of the 2024 plan projects must be made known. For example, the East Side Access Project has major operating costs, and there may be similar ones for the current projects in the new plan. Lastly, we just want to raise concerns about on reorganization, which I know is a topic of this hearing. We think the hiring freeze is a bad management policy because it leads to key positions being left empty based on who happens to retire, while less important jobs are retained. The debarment of contractors is similarly bad public policy because it leads to a smaller vendor pool, reduced competition, and higher costs. And lastly, the MTA police force should not be expanded without significant analysis of how it impacts the operating budget to ensure it does not result in service cuts, both immediately and in the long term as the cost of officers ramps up. And my full testimony is available for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Rodriguez and your colleagues, for this opportunity to testify before you today and for holding the oversight hearing of the MTA. I'm Liam Blank, Advocacy and Policy Manager for Tri-State Transportation Campaign, an organization fighting for sustainable mobility in New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. For years, Tri-State has called for increased funding to improve subways, buses, and commuter rail, including the state of good repair fixes that 9 million daily riders need, as well as expansion of the system to reach communities that are underserved by transit. So we are pleased to see that the MTA's 2020 through 2024 capital program proposes the kinds of system-wide improvements necessary to restore riders' trust in the authority if they are successful. The capital program calls for a historic $51.5 billion in investments in our transit system. The lion's share of that investment, $37.3 billion, will go towards subways, including over $7 billion for signal modernization that should help bring much of the system up to the 90% plus on-time arrival statistics that the L and 7 trains currently have. Another $3.5 billion would go toward buses, the lion's share of which is earmarked for the purchase of new buses, including a significant investment in clean electric buses. While MTA capital construction has made significant strides in streamlining workflows, the MTA should be clear with you and the riding public how it plans to complete the proposed work in the capital plan on time, including improving its capital plan dashboard and creating a detailed online project tracker that allows anyone to see not only when projects are expected to be completed, but also at what cost. We should also understand how the authority plans to handle both state of good repair projects and expansion projects and what gets prioritized in inevitable moments of capacity crunch. Though we want to hear more about the authority's plan to implement the 2020 capital program transparently and cost-effectively, we are very glad to see a robust capital program that improves on previous promises made by the MTA and Fast Forward, moves the MTA toward a fully zero-emissions bus fleet, and delivers the signal upgrades and accessibility improvements riders need to see. With support and meaningful oversight from the legislature and city council, the MTA will have the resources it needs to provide riders with the world-class service New Yorkers deserve. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
James Weissman, Lisa Daglian, Jose Hernandez, Jessica Murray, and Mr. X.
Hey, turn it on. You know, this is getting ridiculous with Patricia dancing like a rockhead. Okay, he stated in his budget he wants 500 more cops. Why? To protect his own interests. He's not providing for our safety, he's providing for his safety. Okay, if you don't already know Danny, which is short for Ydanis, the MTA Police Department has cops sitting at 2 Broadway Avenue, 24 cops watching us in there, standing there doing nothing, standing a bunch of zombies. Okay, he can use them. At least 2 of them are assigned to protect him. But apparently, he forgot that part. Okay, nobody's getting through to him. You're not getting through to him. I'm not getting through. TW Local 100 isn't getting through to him. Okay, at a recent board meeting, he cut me off because he felt my comments by his predecessor were disgusting, and he sent them after me. He has his budget. I have mine. I'm happy to share with you. I didn't get a chance to prepare it. But no, we don't need 500 more cops. We don't need more consultants, which I discovered recently. He hired more consultants than employees. So, as I said before, the MTA doesn't stand for Metropolitan Transportation Authority. It stands for money thrown away. And who we have is ED, Patricia Foye, who looks like Bubba Ray Dudley and Dusty Rhodes with our Sapphire. It's time for him to go. He joined the MTA. He replaced Ronnie Hager, who was a joke, also a joke, as MTA head. And what has he done? Nothing but make childish excuses. And this is what he did here today. He enjoys that. It's a thrill for him. It's like the Thriller, Michael Jackson. It's time for him to go.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Councilman Rodriguez, for this opportunity. My name is Jim Weissman. I'm President and CEO of United Spinal Association, the national organization. We have 58,000 members, the vast majority of whom use wheelchairs, and many thousand live in New York area. 40 years ago, I was the attorney, and United Spinal was the organization. We were called Eastern Paralyzed Veterans Association then, that sued New York City and the MTA to make buses and subways accessible. I have longer remarks that I'll submit, but I do want to get to this. MTA, after 40 years, is finally changing its policy. Its policy was very, very poorly planned 40 years ago, really 35 years ago, to use paratransit as the workhorse for transportation for people with disabilities, keep as many stations inaccessible as possible, and put lifts on half the buses. We got lifts on all the buses because MTA board, their lawyers told us, settle for half, we'll give you all, they just need a victory. And that is what happened. They never bought an inaccessible bus again. But we had 100 key stations, and MTA thought they were gaming the system by keeping the numbers small. We were the first system in the country to agree to make an old rail system accessible. They had no model to follow. MTA thought they were gaming the system by having 360 some odd inaccessible subway stations and getting away with 100. And in fact, it's costing them $700 million to make up for it in paratransit every year. Not only that, Koch, when he was mayor, was convinced by MTA that paratransit solely, as a sole source of transportation, was the answer. And Koch told New York City he could do it for $9 million a year without buses and rail. So MTA now, coming very late to the table, is now saying we're going to use mass transit as the mainline transit as the workhorse for people with disabilities. It's a great move. United Spinal is 100% behind it. Last thing I want to say is, I listened to Chairman Foye and Andy Byford talk about the restrictions on paratransit, on the e-hail system. The ADA requires prohibits any constraints on trips except money. If the MTA if it's financially burdensome, they can stop providing paratransit. But doing things like deliberately increasing the waiting time before you can, 24-hour advance reservation when you could do real time to reduce costs is really to reduce demand. And a trip reducer is probably illegal. It's probably, and also the same thing with the $15 per ride. It's probably a discriminatory practice. It'll be litigated down the road, but if you can provide rides faster, why not? It's only because it's more desirable is why not. That's an artificial constraint on trip demand. And I'm sorry, thank you for indulging me, and I'll give you the rest of my remarks.
Hello, my name is Jessica Murray. I'm a member of the Elevator Action Group with Rise and Resist. I'm a PhD candidate at CUNY, and I'm a person with multiple sclerosis. I'm currently the interim chair of the Advisory Committee on Transportation Accessibility for the New York City Transit. And a lot of the concerns that we brought today have already been addressed. So I'm just going to point out a few additional things. As Jim mentioned, these restrictions to paratransit are probably not legal, and they're not really fair. And I would advise you in your future oversight of the MTA to caution against their comparisons to other cities, because the $15 limit on paratransit trips for on-demand is the most restrictive limit in the country, and that comes from Washington, D.C., which is about 1/5 of the size of New York City. So I don't think you can really compare New York City and Washington, D.C. and say that we're just modeling this after other cities. Likewise, the smallest cap per day for trips is in Boston. They limit it based on the user's previous paratransit usage. Anyone can join their on-demand pilot program, and based on how much they were traveling before they join, they can get that many number of trips per day. But the MTA is limiting it based on the median number of trips only for the people on the on-demand program. So I just wanted you to be aware of that. Other trip caps per day are 4 per day in Washington, D.C., 8 per day in Chicago. Saying that they have to restrict it to 16 trips per month, I think is a little bit disingenuous. It's the same thing when they say we're making the biggest investment in accessibility of any subway system in the country. Well, New York City obviously dwarfs every other city's transit system, so I would just take those comparisons with a grain of salt. We'd also just like to have more transparency in terms of the system-wide accessibility study that's currently underway. The lawsuit that's ongoing, plaintiffs have not been able to get the information about that study and what the costs are that are going to be involved. It's supposed to be finished by the end of the year. It should be public knowledge already, and I hope that you push for that transparency. Additionally, we would like to support representation and inclusion of people with disabilities on the board and in decision-making. We appreciate that they put together this all-volunteer committee of people with disabilities to advise them, but we want people with disabilities making decisions. And in this transformation plan, accessibility got one slide on the whole presentation. Paratransit was mentioned one time. When we're talking about transformation, advocates have been requesting for paratransit to be reformed for years, for decades. And now their idea of reform is just to limit what they gave out unrestricted. They just want to limit it as a way to save money. They also didn't mention that the increase in costs associated with e-hail were also accompanied by an increase in the number of registered passengers in paratransit. So while an 11% increase in costs was true, and you can see that in the data, they also had 15,000 new registrants over that 2-year period. So I would just push you to look more closely at their data and ask them to be more transparent on those points. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Lisa Daglian. I'm the Executive Director of the Permanent Citizens Advisory Committee to the MTA, known as PCAC. We were created by the New York State Legislature in 1981, and our 3 councils are the voice of the nearly 9 million transit and commuters in the 12-county New York MTA region. Thank you for holding this hearing today, both on the capital plan and the transformation plan, which really come together in tandem and are so closely related. We're excited about the potential of the FY 2024 capital plan to really transform the rider experience and improve the system, including long-awaited accessibility projects that the city and state's $3 billion each will fund. That was important to hear today, and I think that that's important to keep saying over and over again. We appreciate, as we know you do, Andy Byford's leadership and the steps he's already taken to improve the city's transit network, as evidenced by the increases in on-time performance and ridership. Funding and implementing this capital plan will really allow the aspirations of Fast Forward, Long Island Railroad Forward, Metro North Way Ahead to become reality. The infusion of congestion pricing is a game changer and will be an integral part of financing the capital plan. However, the bulk of that money won't come through until 2021, until mid-21 to 22. So it's critical that the early funding sources be identified and come through in a timely manner. And that's why our really big ask is for that the city provide its $3 billion as has been laid out, and that the state provide their $3 billion as well early, so that the accessibility projects can really get moving. The MTA has said clearly that it wants to deliver projects better, faster, and more cost effectively, and we look forward to the standardization of its new approach to doing business. We're already seeing a number of positive changes and new approaches, including the use of design-build, bundling projects, reducing contract sign-off turnaround time, speeding up contractor payments, and using community input to determine contractor incentive payments. These are the hallmarks of effective and efficient taxpayer dollars. Approving, funding, and getting the capital plan going will finally help bring about the 21st century transit network riders in our 21st century city and region need. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Jose Hernandez. I'm the New York City Advocacy Coordinator for United Spinal Association, and I am the Civic Engagement Commissioner appointed by the Mayor in 2019. I would like to thank Chair Rodriguez for giving me the opportunity to speak today. I'm going to focus my comments today on the pilot program. New York City gave this pilot program to people with disabilities, and it was a great success. It's given individuals in my chapter the opportunity to travel real time, enjoy many events. They've traveled from Brooklyn to the Bronx to, private events, to doctor's appointments. You can go anywhere in the city, and it has touched the people in the pilot program. It's talked about on their Access a Ride website, on the Facebook group. It's given great praise. With the limits that are put in place, 16 rides per month and $15 limit, is going to cause, it's going to discourage people from using it, and it's going to cause issues. What's going to happen when a person takes a ride and it's over that $15 limit and they don't have the funds to pay for that? You yourself, Member Rodriguez, was talking about how you used to walk from your place at home to college. Could you imagine someone getting on a ride in a taxi cab and it's $30? You have to pay the $275 plus, the additional $15. And what if you don't have it? What's going to happen? It's going to cause an issue. The police officer is going to be called. And what happens to that person with a disability? It's just concerning. Right now in Boston, it's $40 per ride. And New York system is a lot bigger. And the person was saying $6, in surcharges to begin the ride alone. So you can get 6 blocks and be at $15 already. So if you can, address that issue, I would really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
And we know there's always going to be challenges. There's always going to be some stations that, they are like 10 floors down or up, whatever it is. So by knowing that we can do anything, that there's technology, there's resources there, is that possible to make a old station in New York City accessible? Have anyone done some study to look if we can make every single station in New York City accessible?
It's only money. we're talking about. Technology's there. You could, even if there's no place to drop an elevator, you could have an inclined elevator follow a stair contour and move it, put a new staircase. So that if you're committed, if MTA is committed, they can do it. There are more difficult stations than others, and the gap between the station and the platform, which we haven't mentioned, between the platform and the train, which we haven't mentioned, both horizontal and vertical, is a significant disincentive to people who use wheeled mobility aids from using the subway, and makes them dependent on paratransit. If MTA sponsored a design competition right now and said, we are the biggest transit system in the world, we can do this, invent something for us to fill this gap that's temporary, either car-borne or platform-borne, you'd have way more people on wheels using the subway too. But it's, this is a system that's been dragged kicking and screaming for decades into accessibility. Yeah. So it's not what they think of first, but it's a sea change compared to what it was 10 years ago at MTA. They are actually thinking about, if only to cut paratransit costs, they are actually thinking about making mass transit truly accessible.
Can I add, the MTA is currently conducting the system-wide study, and there was a recent article about how the cost of that study has increased because they're really trying to finish it by the end of this year. But when they report their progress to the MTA board, they say, okay, now we've surveyed X number of stations. They haven't talked about how much the cost of retrofitting the whole subway system is going to be. They just say we've analyzed this number of stations. And currently, the plaintiffs in the lawsuit against the MTA have been requesting those documents to understand what the realities are and what the costs are going to be, but they have refused so far to hand that over. And I feel strongly that that should be public information. If they're spending money to find out what it will cost, why wouldn't they be using that as a point to, okay, we know now what the cost will be. They've never done this study in 30 years, but now they're doing it. They're just not sharing that information with the public. And London, as my colleague Colin mentioned, is doing stations. London is much further underground than New York City. They have the same, utilities, water, everything, the same challenges that New York City has, maybe even more. And somehow they're able to do it for a third to a quarter of the price.
Yeah. I have been having conversation, and why I feel that, our goal should be, again, to make all the stations accessible by 2030. I feel that, the city has realized, and all of us has realized, that it's not only close to 1 million New Yorkers with physical challenges, but it's about those of us who will join that community in the future. And it's also the parents that you have two children, that you have a stroller, that you can, you need to rely on an elevator or electrical steer in order to have access to the train. So I just hope again that whatever progress we made in this capital plan, and we will continue again coordinating with you guys and advocating together, and also pushing the MTA to reduce the cost. Because what happened is also, as you know, you're the one that has the expert in that field, that when they come back and they say $20 million for the elevator, $25 million, that's a ridiculous amount. And sometimes even a station like the one in Inglewood, the Daglian 1 train, it was because of the lawsuit that you have just one elevator going downtown.
Right. The ADA requires them to spend an amount equal to 20% of the cost of a renovation on station access. So if they couldn't do both sides of a station, they were skipping it. They would renovate the station, and if 20% didn't pay for uptown and downtown, they just skipped it and didn't do uptown or downtown. So we sued them in Inwood about 10 years ago,
yeah,
and got half a station made accessible, because the ADA requires incremental accessibility. At least it's half a station. That is the new MTA policy, or what? Now it's obviously much more aggressive. But you could see by skipping the station, they're saying, okay, use paratransit. Every time they do it, it's putting people on paratransit, which is why there's a nightmare cost of paratransit now, to say nothing of people who think they can't use mass transit, who probably could if they were, since for the last 30 years as they went to school and started work, if they were using mass transit.
Yeah.
But now there's a paratransit-dependent community.
Well, thank you. I'm more than happy to continue working close with you guys. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
So with that, we close our hearing. Thank you, everyone.